On a hot day, young people chatted with each other and decided where they would have lunch. At that very moment, the young ladies came up to them and greeted them with joyful smiles, and also said that they really enjoyed the lecture. Everyone looked closely at the young man and praised him. Even the guys were delighted with him. The young man told his friend with a smile that he was giving everyone promises to have dinner another time. He smiled and told his friend that he was very popular, but at the same time, Hong Hung was happy and simply could not imagine that he was a young father. Hun Hyun, in turn, was not at all used to constantly being the center of attention. After all, some time ago, he had a completely different life. He was an ordinary student and worked in the professor's research lab. Just recently, he was a small and invisible man, an ordinary student who combined work and study. The young man asked his friend how he had achieved such changes so quickly. Hong Hung was puzzled, as he himself did not know, since there was no scientific explanation for this. At the same time, they noticed that everyone was crowded together and looking at the young girl with surprise and admiration. At that very moment, he was taken aback as he noticed the dear man. Hong Hing understood perfectly well that all the changes in his life began from the moment he first met his daughter. It was his dear and beloved little Kim Charon, who was now the most precious person in his life. Hong Hing was sleeping quietly in his bed, but suddenly he heard a loud voice and just thought it was a dream. But at that very moment, he clearly heard the voice of a young girl. He was taken aback, as he did not understand whom she called father. Charon, with a joyful smile, shouted to her father to wake up as the sun had already risen. At that moment, he sighed heavily as he remembered that he had suddenly found a daughter. He learned that he now had to take care of her, but he still found it difficult to accept the new reality. He never thought that something like this would happen to him, because he was just an ordinary college student exhausted by the search for a job and a stable income. At that very moment, all his thoughts disappeared as his mother called him, but he was very angry because the professor had worn out all his nerves, and now his own mother was arguing with him. She yelled at him because she wanted him to find a good job, but he understood that it was difficult because his parents' money for his studies ran out early, so he had to take time off periodically to earn money. And after 6 years, he was finally able to graduate from the university with a bachelor's degree. But the professor said that to get a specialty, he had to complete a master's degree. He did this, and then it turned out that he needed to get a PhD in order to teach. Hong Hing was puzzled and realized that he was irritable due to stress. A moment later, he called his mother and apologized for getting carried away. He just wanted a prosperous life and to have a family and children. But unfortunately, he is not even able to provide for himself. Hong Hung understood that these were all unattainable dreams for him, but he still hoped for the best. The next day, he was writhing in pain on his bed, having drunk too much with a friend that evening. Unfortunately, he had a very bad headache and he simply could not get up from his seat. But at that very moment, he heard someone ringing his doorbell, and unfortunately, the person was persistent. Hong Hing sighed heavily as he realized that he would have to get up and see the unexpected guest out. At that very moment, he opened the door and shouted angrily at the guest. But a moment later, he was taken aback as he saw a little girl on the threshold. After a few seconds, his irritation vanished, as he was susceptible to any kindness. Hong Hing looked closely at the girl and asked who had really let her out for a walk in such cold weather in just a dress. Hong Hing sighed heavily and said that he would immediately report her to the police as she was probably lost. But at that very moment, the young girl called him and called him father. He froze in shock as he had not expected anything like this at all. At that moment, he said with a smile that it seemed like she had lost her father, and he probably looked very similar, but she said that it was not so, and he was her father. Hong Heng otherwise, she said that he could not be her father, but she insisted otherwise. Then he sighed heavily and asked who her mother was. The girl said that her mother's name was Bei Yana. Hong Hing was taken aback by shock when he heard this name. Bei Yana was his friend from Jugon's first year. He knew that many years ago they went on tour together, and they slept together, but after that she abruptly stopped communicating. At the same moment, the young lady also called her mother, and a moment later, she handed the phone to her father. He sighed heavily, but still picked up the phone because he wanted to talk to her. A moment later, he was taken aback as he heard her voice. But still, the young man asked what was going on, and Bayena said that Cherney was indeed his daughter. She said he could do a paternity test, but he asked why she had disappeared without giving any explanation. Bayena asked for forgiveness because she could not tell him everything, and she had circumstances, and she left the child in his care. She said that she had already settled everything legally and would send him alimony, but he wanted to sort out the current situation. But she simply turned off the phone and said goodbye to him. He was shocked and didn't notice how he swore in front of the child. Sharon said with a smile that she also loves pancakes. At that very moment, he sighed heavily and took his daughter into the apartment. The young lady was delighted because it was her first time in her father's house. He sighed heavily and looked closely at his daughter as everything was new to him. He knew that his life was not a bed of roses, and life had given him a child. Hong Hing had no idea how much his life would change. Sometime later, the young man was actively looking for something to feed his daughter. Hong Heng was puzzled because he usually did not eat at home, and on weekends he slept and ate only in the evening. At that very moment, Mig sighed heavily and said that it looked like they needed to go to the store. Hong Heng looked at the girl with bewilderment as he understood that she would be cold. He wondered if that was all she had. At that very moment, he asked where her winter clothes were because it was freezing outside. She smiled and said that she was not cold. Hong Heng understood that this might be the case, but he couldn't go with her when she was wearing a light dress. At that very moment, the young man lifted his daughter, and a moment later, he wrapped her in his jacket. She said with a smile that it was warmer this way. He was glad and also said that she should dress warmly as she might catch a cold. She smiled and said that she was not at all afraid of the cold, but it was very warm and she liked it. He hugged her tenderly the way he liked too, and so he suggested that there was no need to buy clothes. But a few minutes after they went outside, everyone started looking at how the daughter was sitting in her father's bosom. He sighed heavily as he realized that it looked like his daughter needed to buy a down jacket after all, since everyone was paying attention to them. At that very moment, the young man ran to the shopping center with lightning speed as he knew that there were children's things there. Hong Hing was a little puzzled and didn't understand why children's clothes were as expensive as adults. But at the same time, the young lady was glad that her father bought her things. Charon asked her father if something was hurting him. He sighed heavily and said that she had just imagined it. Hong Hing was a little confused when he bought food because he had no money at all. At that very moment, he asked his daughter if she liked dry breakfast. She said with a smile that she loved everything her father cooked. Hong Heng was glad to hear this, as these words melted his heart. But at that very moment, he was taken aback, because he did not understand what had happened to him. But a moment later, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his stomach, and at that very moment, he felt ill. Hong Heng looked at his daughter intently and hurriedly asked her to stay where she was, as he needed to go to the restroom. A moment later, he ran with lightning speed to look for the toilet. The young lady stared at him with a gentle smile, but as soon as she lost sight of him, she changed her expression. At that moment, everyone began to stare at her, as she was very beautiful. The man slowly approached the young girl and asked where her parents were. Charon frowned at the stranger and said that her father had gone to the toilet. The man told the girl with a smile that she was very sweet and he could help her. But at that very moment, he was taken aback as she called him in a threatening tone. She looked him straight in the eye and told him with cold fury that he should leave her alone. At that moment, everyone present shuddered at her cold tone. The man was taken aback and froze in place in shock, as he did not expect such a thing. But everyone present at that moment noticed that black lightning flashed behind her. After some time, Hong Heng ran up to his daughter and asked for forgiveness, as he had to stand in line. A moment later, everyone was staring at them as her expression changed, and she rushed joyfully towards her father. She smiled and said that she had been good, and also asked if his stomach still hurt. Charon touched her father's stomach and said with a smile that she had healing hands, and soon he would not have any pain. At that very moment, the young man was taken aback and froze in place as his pain went away. But a moment later, he looked at everyone present in bewilderment as everyone began to whisper that she was not at all like him. They said that the girl most likely looked like her beautiful mother, but they also said that he looked like a beggar. He was puzzled and did not understand how they could gossip about a complete stranger. But still, he could not deny that the young girl was not at all like him. That same evening, the young man studied information about a paternity test at a private laboratory, but he knew it was not a cheap procedure. He understood that he simply had no choice and had to do everything secretly. Hong Hung glanced sideways at the young girl, who was sleeping quietly in bed. He was puzzled, but still knew that his ex-lover said that this was his daughter. But he saw that they had not the slightest resemblance. But at that very moment, he realized that he needed to take a paternity test and confirm his beloved's words. After some time, he remained but looked over the doctor. The man smiled and said that the test showed that the girl was indeed his daughter. He was shocked and did not understand how this could happen. Perhaps she was not at all like him. The doctor reported that all the indicators matched, so there could be no mistake. Hong Hing was puzzled and did not understand how such things were possible. But now he was convinced that she really was his daughter. He didn't know what to do now and how he should raise the child. He knew he had to go to the lab and didn't know who would pick her up if he sent her to the garden. Hong Hung was puzzled because he knew his stress levels were only increasing. But when he opened the door to the apartment, he was taken aback because he saw her young girl, who rushed into his arms. He smiled and asked what she did without him. She smiled and said that she was fine and was watching cartoons. Hong Hung looked at the young girl with a gentle smile, as he was pleased to return to a house where someone was waiting for him. He smiled and said that he was going to take a shower now, and she could watch some more cartoons. Hong Hing was immersed in his thoughts, as he understood that he would have to survive somehow. He understood that all he could do was abandon his dissertation defense and look for a job. At that moment, he was taken aback and threw his thoughts away as the young lady looked in on him because she also wanted to brush her teeth. He looked at her with a smile, and at that very moment, he wondered how he had ever lived without her. And a moment later, he saw the young lady brushing her teeth. He watched the process with a smile as he saw that she was very cute. Hong Hing asked his daughter if she was bored alone at home. She looked at him intently and said that she really wanted to go to him, but she knew he was at work, so she endured it. Hong Hung looked at her with a smile as he saw that she was already big. Charon smiled and said that her mother said the same thing. He also asked where she and her mother had lived before she said that they had lived very far away, so he assumed that they had lived abroad. Hong Hung wanted to know more about them, but he didn't want to burden the child with questions. Sometime later, they lay quietly in bed, with the young lady saying that she felt very good sleeping next to her father. Charon smiled and asked her father if he was glad that she had come. He said with a smile that he was very glad. Charon beamed with joy and said that she would give him a massage right away and that he should lie down comfortably. He was surprised but agreed. A moment later, the young lady was giving her father a vigorous massage, and he was enjoying it. Hong Hung enjoyed the massage after the shower and gradually fell asleep. A moment later, the young lady noticed that her father had fallen asleep. She poked him with her finger to make sure he was indeed asleep. A moment later, she looked at her father with a tender smile. At that very moment, she used her power against her father because she wanted him to be handsome and healthy. She directed all her power at her father because she wanted only the best for him. A moment after using force, she looked at her father with joy. After everything that happened, she wished him good night with a smile and lay down next to him. The next day, the young man woke up, and to his surprise, he noticed that his neck no longer hurt. He was surprised because he didn't have any pain anywhere in his body, but at the same time, he thought it was strange because he hadn't done anything yesterday. At that moment, the young lady rushed to her father as she wanted to hug him. He was surprised that she woke up so early. Charon smiled and asked her father if he was feeling well. He smiled and said that he felt great. She hugged him tenderly and said that it was all her therapeutic massage. He praised her and said that she was great. She gave him back his strength. Charon said with a satisfied smile that from now on she would give him a massage every day. At that moment, he smiled and said that she was probably hungry, so they could have breakfast already. But a moment later, he saw that his mother was calling him. The young man was taken aback and froze in place. He was puzzled because he knew he had to tell his parents that they now had a granddaughter. He didn't know what to do, and he thought that the best way out was not to answer the call. But he still gathered his courage and answered the call. He talked to his mother for a while his daughter watched him closely. Hong Hung sighed heavily and said that he was fine. Also, after a short conversation with his mother, he announced that he would not be pursuing a PhD this year as he needed a job. His mother was happy to hear this, and he also said that he would arrive before the holidays. After some time, he sighed heavily after a difficult conversation with his mother. He wanted to introduce his daughter to his parents the following week. He knew his mother would be happy because he would be joining the workforce, but he didn't know how they would take the news about a granddaughter. At that moment, he threw all his thoughts away as his daughter hugged him tightly. She sighed heavily and said that her father was sad, and she was sad too, but he assured her that everything was fine, and she didn't need to worry. Sharon said that if something was bothering him, he should tell her, and she would do everything to make sure that everything was okay with Dad. He looked at the rain with a smile and said that he would definitely let her know, but now they should finish breakfast. Sometime later, they were happily having breakfast together. Hong Hung stared at his daughter as her smile truly brought out all his worries. That same day, the young man asked his friend in surprise if he had actually gone to see a dermatologist. Since all his dark circles had suddenly disappeared somewhere, he leaned back and said that he himself did not know where they had disappeared too. He didn't pay any attention to the lack of pain in his neck in the morning, but then he was surprised to find that the dark circles had also disappeared. He assumed that this was all his daughter's massage. At that very moment, the young man informed his friend that the professor was looking for him. He informed his friend that the professor was in a bad mood, so he should be careful. Hong Hing thanked his friend with a smile for the warning. After some time, he finally entered the professor's office. But before he could even cross the threshold, he received documents in his face. The professor yelled at the young man and said that his abstract should be as informative and detailed as possible. The professor looked at the young man with disdain as he was fresh, and he assumed that he had slept well. He shouted that the young man wasn't even ashamed of the play he had submitted to him. Hong Hing sighed heavily and asked for forgiveness, but the professor was furious and shouted that the young man was a worthless worker. Hong Hung was furious and listened to all the professor's insults as he had said yesterday that the abstract was unexpectedly good. Hong Hing knew that the professor would nitpick whenever he was in a bad mood. The professor sighed heavily and told the young man that next time he should avoid making such gross mistakes. At that very moment, he asked the young man, "What about the dissertation?" Hong Hing said that he had not done anything yet. After some time, he left the professor's office. His friend met him at the exit and asked if everything was okay with him. He told his friend not to pay attention to the professor, as he was yelling at everyone. Hong Hing was that he shouldn't pay attention to the professor, but he was still upset. He would like to take revenge on the professor and send him away, but still did not want to leave with a scandal. But at that very moment, he was taken aback when he opened his phone because he saw his lovely daughter. Hong Hing looked at the photograph of his daughter with a tender smile. Even looking at her photo, his heart thawed and his soul calmed down. He wanted to hold out a little longer for her sake. Hong Hing wanted to try not to do anything that the professor could find fault with him for. He understood that many people had worked with the professor before him, and he could do the same. Sometime later, after a lot of work, he did everything perfectly without a single mistake. At that moment, he turned around and asked his colleague if she had seen the professor. Aram coldly answered the young man that she had not seen him. At that moment, she looked at him menacingly and asked why he was asking her about such a thing. He was taken aback, as he did not expect such a look, and asked for forgiveness. Hong Hung sighed heavily and looked closely at her, as if he could see that she had been somewhat depressed lately. At the same time, the young lady was leisurely going about her business. But a moment later, she stopped as the professor called her with a sly grin and asked where she was rushing to. He smiled and said that she should not forget to look in on him before leaving. Yerim looked at the man intently, as she did not like this. As soon as the young man returned home, he was immediately greeted by his daughter, who joyfully threw herself into his arms. She smiled and said that she had warmed up some food for herself and eaten it herself. He smiled and said that she was certainly a good girl. But at that very moment, he realized that she could lose weight from such food. He was scared because he understood that his beloved would simply kill him. Hong Heng understood that he had no other choice and needed to take his daughter to her parents. The next day, he took his daughter to her parents, but he was a little late and received a reprimand from his boss. Hong Heng apologized and said that he would quickly lose his family affairs and come to work. He was puzzled, but at that very moment, his daughter asked why they were shouting at him. He said that her father had done something wrong, and the professor had shouted at him. Hong Heng told his daughter that she didn't need to worry about such things, but he also didn't know how to explain this situation to his parents. At the same time, the young lady's expression changed, as she did not like at all that the professor was shouting at her father. After some time, the young lady greeted her grandmother and grandfather and introduced herself. The couple were taken aback because they did not expect anything like this. Hong Heng smiled and said that it was his daughter in front of them. The couple were shocked, but he said he only found out about it recently. Hong Heng sighed heavily and told his parents everything that had happened. His father was furious. He shouted that they should have come to them and told them everything. They didn't believe at all that it was their granddaughter in front of them. But at that very moment, he showed a paternity test. The man was taken aback and told his wife to go and feed the child as he intended to speak with his son alone. He sighed heavily and called his son into the room. Hong Heng was puzzled, as he knew he was about to have a difficult conversation with his father. The man sighed heavily, and Po asked his son what he was going to do next. Hong Hyun W didn't hesitate for a minute, and said that he would raise the child because she was his daughter. The man immediately said that this was clear, but he was now asking about Yena Hong Hyun, said that he could not get through to her. At that very moment, the man asked his son whether he had really come so quickly because of his daughter. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that he couldn't look after her properly because he was working and he couldn't feed her either. He wanted his parents to help him in this situation. Hong Hin, I wouldn't even be surprised if his parents kicked him out with a scandal. He understood that it would be difficult for him since he didn't even have a job. At that moment, the man sighed heavily and said that it was natural to worry about the child and they would take care of her. But he still told his son that his task was to find Yena and get together with her. He told his son that parents should raise a child together, and even if he finds a job, they should live together and raise their daughter. Hong Heng looked at his father with a joyful smile and asked if he had really accepted the girl as his granddaughter. He looked closely at his son and said that unnecessary questions were unnecessary, and that he was not trying for his son's sake, but for his granddaughter's. At that very moment, the young man thanked his father. The man said that they would now rely on the money that they had put aside for his wedding, but he still told his son that he would pay him back later when they finally decided to get married. The young man happily thanked his father. Hong, after some time, Hen told his daughter that he was leaving and that she would stay with his parents for now, but soon they will go somewhere together. She smiled and asked if he promises her. A moment later, they finally agreed to go somewhere with her, and she happily said goodbye to her father. He smiled and said goodbye to her until the evening. Today, he seemed to be flying to work on wings, and this had never happened to him before. He was afraid for his daughter, but thanks to her parents, everything would be all right with her. He was in a hurry to get to work, but still found time to look through several options for where he and his daughter could go. Before she showed up on her days off, he spent his time just sleeping and doing nothing. But now, for the first time, he was looking forward to a day off to spend with his family. But on the same day, the professor informed everyone that the project was completed, and he decided to organize a gathering of all colleagues before the new year on the weekend. The young man was taken aback and immediately said that he really did have plans for the weekend. The professor looked at him in bewilderment, as he had not expected anything like this. But at that very moment, the young man, gritting his teeth, said that he had resolved all his family circumstances and would go. The professor smiled and said that they would go out into nature and recuperate together. At that moment, the professor looked at the young people and asked if they would go. As he left, he said with a smile that silence was a sign of consent, meaning they were all going, but if anyone refused, he would be very upset. The young people looked after him, puzzled, without saying anything in response. After the professor left, they started discussing the joint trip as they all had plans. Hong Heng knew that everyone in the laboratory was under the professor's thumb, and no one could openly object to him. Their careers were like carrots on his fishing rod, which they followed blindly, like donkeys. None of them liked it, but they had to do what the professor said. He was puzzled because he knew that he could not refuse such an offer, and he knew that his daughter would be upset. That same day, he puzzledly informed his daughter that he would not be able to be with her on the weekend. Hong Heng told his daughter that they would go somewhere next week, as he had already bought tickets. But at that very moment, the young lady said that he should hug her. He was surprised, but agreed. Hun Heng hugged his daughter and asked if she was upset. She smiled and said she was just worried. but she could see that he himself didn't want to go on the hike. She sighed heavily and said sadly that it was as if someone had forced her father. Hong Hyun said with a smile that everything would be fine for him. And besides, he hadn't done any sports for a long time, and this would be good for him. Charon looked at her father closely and asked if it was true. He smiled and said that it was so. Charon asked her father if he would have to go on a campaign because of his evil uncle. He said that since they had finished the project, the professor wanted to celebrate. She hugged him and asked him to come back safe and sound. Hong Hing said that she didn't need to worry because the mountain they were going to was safe, and he also thanked her for worrying about him. At the same time, the young lady was burning with anger. That same evening, the young man looked closely at his daughter and asked if she was sleeping. He sighed heavily as he knew they had been riding the bus for a long time, and she was tired. He picked her up from her parents, and they got home very late. He knew that if he had to take public transport like that every day, he would go broke. He immediately thought about kindergarten, but realized that he needed to put off these thoughts until tomorrow. Moments later, the young lady opened her eyes and saw that her father was sleeping. She rushed to him with a smile and checked if he was asleep. At that very moment, she used her power because she wanted deep and sound sleep to come to her father. Charon looked at her father with a smile because she saw that he was dreaming of something pleasant. She was glad that he smiled in his sleep, but at that very moment, her face changed and she wanted to scold the evil uncle professor. After asking for forgiveness, she said that she would watch a little bit of Memory of the Father. A moment later, the truth was revealed to her, and she realized that the professor was a kind person in public, but in reality, he was a cunning and insidious man. He also fawned over his superiors and terrorized his subordinates. She remembered how her dearly beloved mother used to say that if she saw a hypocrite oppressing people, she could punish him. Her mother said that she could intervene in the situation, but without disturbing the natural processes. At that very moment, she used her power because she wanted to know where the professor was now. A few minutes later, she found him. Charon looked at her father and said that she needed to teach the scoundrel a lesson, but she would be back soon. A moment later, she disappeared into thin air. Some time later, the young lady found herself in the professor's room. She looked closely at the sleeping professor, but at the same time, she wanted to see what crime he was hiding. At that very moment, Charon directed her power at the sleeping professor. She saw that he sinned a lot, so she did not know which of the sins to choose so that it would bear fruit. She directed her power at the professor, and the sin would return to the professor and to any other person it touched. She knew that now this sin would mature ahead of time and bear fatal fruits, while she knew that it would have matured in the future even without his help. Charon looked closely at the professor as she wanted to come back later to check the results. After some time, she returned, and with a smile told her father about it. She knew that he would be surprised when he found out the truth. Charon guessed that her father might soon find out what she had done. Charon was happy because she was supposed to tell him that when he found out it was a surprise for him. But now she wished her father good night and sound sleep. The next day, the young lady happily saw her father off. He smiled and said that he would be fine, but also asked her to listen to Grandma and Grandpa. She smiled and said that she would be obedient, Madame. With a smile told her son that the girl was golden, and he did not need to worry. Hong Hyun-s looked at his daughter tenderly, because when his child was complimented, it felt much stronger than the compliment to himself. But he was still puzzled, as this was not the weekend he had hoped for. After some time, the professor greeted everyone, gathered with a smile. He shouted that they should enjoy the cool, fresh air, but at the same time, they should work as a well-coordinated team. The young people were puzzled, as they had not wanted to have such an active holiday at all. Chang-soo kept saying the whole way that it was very difficult for him, and he kept talking about it. Chang-soo looked at his comrade intently and asked if he wasn't tired. The young man managed to tell you that everything was fine for now. His friend suggested that he was secretly playing sports. Chang-soo looked at his friend intently and said that he must have been eating some good food since his skin had become so light. Hong Hen denied everything, but recently he noticed that he felt lighter. Before this, pain all over the body after sleep was common. But he noticed that since his daughter came into his life, his health has improved. Hong Hen, despite everything, had hopes that he would soon go to his daughter. Chang-soo was puzzled as he told his friend that he was disappointing him as he was smiling at his own thoughts. Hong Heng told his friend that he was already in his 20s and was no longer in good health. But his friend said that laboratory rats could not be resilient. Chang-su asked his friend if he was tired after a long hike. Hong Hung didn't have time to answer because he noticed the professor who was smiling and telling the girl that she could rest as much as she wanted. The young people immediately exchanged glances as they noticed that the girl had been gloomy and depressed lately. Chang-su sighed heavily and said that she had been somewhat gloomy since the last corporate party. Hong Heng thought for a moment because his friend was right, because it was from that moment that she became somehow cool. They were surprised that after many absences, the professor did not say anything to her, because if there had been someone else in her place, the professor would have already bitten him. Chang-su assumed there was some good reason for her absence, because then the professor started yelling at them when he noticed she was absent. Hong Heng looked at his friend and told him to speak more quietly because the professor might hear them. The young man smiled and told his friend that he would say that it was the other one who started this conversation. Hong Heng was shocked by such a statement. Sometime later, everyone was in a small cafe, drinking after the long march. The professor looked at the lady with a smile and said that they should have a drink together. She was puzzled because he made her feel sick, but she still agreed. At that very moment, she asked if he had forgotten his promise. The professor asked which one exactly she was talking about. She was taken aback and looked at him angrily. But at that very moment, the professor said with a smile that he remembered everything. He said that he would get a place for her, and she would study abroad. And when she returns, he will help her get a professor's degree. The young lady in turn was trembling with rage. She said that he had to do what he promised. Otherwise, she would do it. At that moment, he was taken aback and asked in surprise if she had really threatened him. Aram said that this was not so. She was furious because he was the one who had threatened her career, but she didn't understand why she was having a hard time containing her emotions today. He looked at her with a smile and said that he would keep his promise, but she had to be honest. At that very moment, she agreed the professor was taken aback, as he did not expect a quick agreement. She looked at him with a fierce grin and said that she would be honest with him, and he could be sure of it. At the same time, they were enveloped in a veil of smoke, which was invisible to the average person. Sharon watched them closely, as she knew that everything was going according to her plan. She knew that things were a little hard and painful for the girl now, but she also knew that everything would soon be resolved, and everything would be fine. A few days later, the young man looked at his friend in shock as he learned that the professor had been summoned to the prosecutor. Chang-su told a friend that the professor at the house of Galsa, to Yarim, was at a weekend get-together. The young man was stunned. Now he understood why she was so irritable, but he hoped that she was doing well. Chang-su sighed heavily and said that they would have to make a project closure report. Hong Heng was puzzled as he assumed that the university already considered him closed. He understood that all their work had been in vain. The young people were puzzled because they did not know what would happen to their jobs now. The professor put no effort into the project, and yet the order was placed in his name, and without the professors, all their work would be wasted. At that very moment, the young man informed Hong Hei, "The dean is calling him." The young man was puzzled, as he did not know what the dean wanted from him. After some time, he finally met with the dean, and he asked if the young man knew the reason for the professor's absence. Hong Heng said he was generally familiar with the situation. He started talking about this project. Hong Heng said that all they had to do was double-check and write a report. At that very moment, the dean told the young man that he was entrusting him with completing the project. The dean said that he was a senior member of the lab, and since everything had happened to the professor, he should take responsibility for the project. Hong Heng was shocked by what he heard. He understood that they were in for a terrible competition with other laboratories. The dean said that he had already contacted the clients, and now all they had to do was finish and submit the project. He told the young man with a smile that he did not need to fuss and should work calmly because he always managed. Hong Heng sighed heavily and agreed. After some time, he told his comrades that he just needed to read the final report and publish the project. The young people were surprised, but they knew what was going on. Chang-su said that there will be elections for the university rector soon, and the dean wanted to take credit for this project and thereby increase his chances of getting the position. They understood that everything was logical. Hong Heng said with a smile that his task was simply to prepare and deliver a detailed report. Chang-su asked his friend with a smile if he could handle it, because if he stuttered while presenting the report, everything would go to hell. At that very moment, he rebuffed his friend and told his comrades with a smile that they should go and complete the project. Hong Hung looked at his comrades with a satisfied smile, as he wanted to get to work quickly. After some time, he met his daughter and apologized for being late, but she smiled and said that she understood because he was working. Hong Hing said that he would go to the office of a big company tomorrow, so he had to work late. Charon asked in surprise what he would do there. He smiled and said that he would be giving a report on the work done, so he asked her to wish him luck. She smiled a radiant smile and wished him luck. That same evening, the young lady looked intently at her father, not knowing what to do. But a moment later, a brilliant idea came to her mind. Using her power, she saw several jars in front of her, and with a smile, she wondered what would best help her father. Charon knew that a little knowledge wouldn't hurt him. Also looking at her father, she assumed that he also needed confidence. She also used a charm. But after a moment, she was taken aback, as she had overdone it with the charm. Charon wanted to put in a few drops, but accidentally overdid it, but still hoped that everything would be fine. Charon knew that there is no such thing as too much charm. At that moment, she used her power and poured her small spell into her father. A few minutes later, she wished her father good luck with a joyful smile. The next day, he got ready and asked his daughter what he looked like. She said with a smile that he was simply handsome. He was a little surprised, as he had felt calm and confident in the morning, and therefore assumed that he would be able to move mountains that day. The next day, he came to the building of the big corporation. But at that very moment, he was taken aback, since he was coming to the corporation alone for the first time, and was very nervous. He thought that he still needed to take some sedatives. But at that very moment, he calmed himself down and confidently walked inside. He remembered his daughter, who wished him luck with a joyful smile. He knew his daughter was for him, so now he had to try and not lose confidence. After some time, a young lady met him and said with a smile that the management would arrive soon. She looked at him intently and informed him that the director of the corporation would also be at the presentation, and he still had time to prepare. He smiled and said that he was ready, but also asked her to print out the materials. Hong Hyun was shocked because he was very scared when he heard about the director, and now he realized that he still needed to take the pills. He burst into bitter tears as he understood that one mistake and his path to any career would be cut off at the root. At that moment, he greeted the leader, but the young man said that now was not the best time. Hong Hung was taken aback and asked what he was talking about. Manager Yang said that he would explain later after the presentation. In that moment, his confidence was shattered, and he hadn't even started yet. Hong Hung was very worried and saw that everyone was already getting ready. After some time, the man looked intently at the young man and sternly told him to begin the presentation. Hong Hung was extremely nervous because he had only seen the director on TV, and now he felt that if he withdrew, he would simply be kicked out. He sighed heavily and began his presentation anyway. After some time, he finally completed his report. Hong Hung was very scared because he saw that everyone was silent and he seemed to have screwed up somewhere. He tried to remember where he could have made a mistake. At that very moment, the director looked menacingly at the young man and told him to state his name. Hong Heng asked the director in bewilderment if he really meant the title of the study. The director snorted and said that he was not blind since the name was on the screen. He asked the speaker's name. Hong Hung was taken aback and immediately introduced himself. At that very moment, the director, with a gentle smile, asked the young man to write down the degree of accuracy of the research. Hong Hung began to describe, but at that very moment, he noticed that the director smiled. He was glad that the director smiled, as he assumed it was a success. At that moment, the director said that this was all he wanted to know. A moment later, everyone began to say goodbye to the director. Hong Hing was puzzled. He thought that since the director smiled, everything was fine, but it seemed like the opposite was true. At that very moment, he was taken aback as he heard someone calling him. The manager looked at the young man with a smile and said that they had listened to him carefully and that the director had also liked the presentation. Hong Hing was a little puzzled and wondered if it was really him who had suddenly left. But looking at everyone present, he saw that their mood was positive. He couldn't tell if he had failed or if everything had gone well. At that very moment, the man said that they must urgently implement the sensual technology that this research had yielded. But Madame immediately asked what would happen if the investment didn't pay off. She knew they couldn't throw money away. At that moment, a quarrel started between them. Hong Hung was puzzled that they were arguing. At that moment, the man said that they should still ask the opinion of a specialist. He asked Hong Hung what he thought about this. At that very moment, the man was taken aback and asked for forgiveness as he mistook him for an employee of their company's. Hong Hing was puzzled as he knew that he was not easy to confuse, but he should be glad that they liked him so much. At that very moment, the lady told the manager with a smile that he had to escort the specialist since they had detained him. Hong Hung was glad that he was finally leaving. The manager looked closely at the young man and said that he had previously thought he was shy, but today his opinion had changed. He said that they had already decided to leak this project. Hong Hyun was shocked. Hong Hing was puzzled and realized that all his efforts were in vain. But at that very moment, the manager told the young man with a smile that everything had gone great. The manager advised the young man not to worry. He also asked if he was planning to improve his qualifications abroad. Hong Hing was taken aback and said in surprise that he had not planned anything like that. At that very moment, the manager asked with a smile, "How about Togo working for their company?" Hong Hing was taken aback and wondered if this was a recruitment attempt on their part. Leader Yan said with a smile that he shouldn't be afraid and should just listen to him. The manager said that the boss liked the young man, and if he thinks about a career, the doors of their company will be opened. Hong Hung thanked the young man for his attention to his person. Hong Hyun-nae was in a hurry to return home, but he couldn't believe that the director liked his performance. He knew that there was no magic in their days. He was just lucky. But a moment later, he looked at his phone because he saw that he had received a message. At that moment, he was taken aback and looked at the phone in bewilderment. He was shocked that his girlfriend sent him money. He was glad about this because he knew that they could now go to a restaurant. Hong Hing was glad that he had managed to finish his workday early, so he rushed at full speed to his daughter. That same evening, he met with his parents, who were worried about his work, but they also said that the restaurant was very expensive. He smiled and said that he left early because he had completed the project successfully, and besides, he had made some money. At that very moment, the man noticed that his granddaughter had cut the steak correctly. She said with a smile that her mother had taught her this. The madam smiled as she saw that the girl was well behaved. She also said that her father broke dishes when she was a child. Hong Hing said with a smile that his daughter was more like her mother. He even felt a little sad that she wasn't like him, but he knew that these were all trifles because she was actually his daughter. Hong Hung thanked his parents for looking after his daughter. He also spoke about difficulties at work, but said that he no longer plans to obtain a PhD. His parents said everything turned out well and believed that their son would succeed. He smiled and said that he had to be responsible because he now had a daughter. Sometime later, they returned home. Charon said with a smile that her grandmother cooked something delicious every day. He sighed heavily and asked if she really liked it more with them than with him. She smiled happily and said that this was not so because she loved him more than anyone else. At that very moment, the young man beamed with happiness. He happily grabbed his daughter and lifted her up, saying that he also loved her more than anyone in the world. At that very moment, he was taken aback as she touched his face. Sharon asked her father if it was comfortable for him to wear glasses. He sighed heavily and said that, of course, he felt uncomfortable. At the same moment, she asked why he was wearing them. He said that he could not read or look through a microscope without them. But he also thanked his daughter for always worrying about him. The professor's criminal case was pushed forward because Yerim collected evidence and presented it. So everyone gathered because they wanted him fired. Thanks to these events, he was able to spend a whole week with his daughter. He looked at his daughter with a smile and said that they would soon go to an amusement park. But a moment later, he was taken aback as he heard some kind of rumble outside the window. Hong Hing was very surprised because he saw a downpour outside the window in the middle of winter. He was shocked as all his plans had been ruined by the weather. But his daughter said they should pray. She said in all seriousness that if they prayed, the rain would go away. He looked at her with a smile as she was behaving very sweetly. He was puzzled because he still knew that prayer would not help. But at that moment, she said that he must pray. Charon told father that he must ward off the rain. He looked at his beautiful daughter with a smile and began to pray. Moments later, they both began to pray, looking out the window. The next day, the young lady happily woke up her father as she wanted him to look out the window as soon as possible. She screamed that he had to stand like that as she wanted to show him something. At that very moment, she said with a smile that instead of rain, it was already snowing. The young man was surprised because he did not expect anything like this. Charon smiled and said that she told him that he needed to pray and everything would pass. He looked at his daughter intently because he did not know which was better, rain or snow. But he knew that lately there had been one good thing after another. He didn't want to find out the reasons, and at the same moment said with a smile that they should get ready to go out. Hong Hung knew that today would be his best day because he would spend it with his daughter. Sometime later, they did visit the amusement park. The young lady was very happy about this. Hong Heng thought for a moment as he didn't know where it would be best to go. At that very moment, he saw that she had noticed something interesting. A moment later, he suggested that she go somewhere. Hong Hyun looked at my daughter with admiration because she was very cute. He said with a smile that this hat suited her very well. She smiled and said that he should also choose something for himself. Hong Hung was taken aback and said that he was already an adult and nothing would suit him. But after a moment, he finally agreed because he saw her eyes, which asked him to look for a hat. A moment later, he asked with a smile if this decoration suited him. She smiled and said that it looked great. At that very moment, he noticed that passers-by were looking at them and smiling and showing affection as the daughter and father looked cute together. He was pleased to hear such words, and it was better than the fact that his daughter was not like him. He looked at his daughter with a tender smile because he didn't know when else he would have the chance to have such a fun time with her. At that very moment, he said with a smile that today they would be cute deer. She looked at her father with a joyful smile. After some time, Hong Hung smiled and told his daughter that if she wanted to go somewhere, she should tell him. At that moment, he was looking closely at the brochure as he considered where they could go. Sharon immediately showed her father a wonderful attraction and said that she wanted to go there. He was taken aback and said that he would take her to this attraction when she grew up. She was surprised but still agreed. Sharon sighed heavily and said that she wanted to ride the ride that went high into the sky. At that very moment, he said with a smile that they could go on one such attraction. After some time, the young lady happily surveyed the surroundings from a bird's-eye view. She was happy, and a moment later, with a smile, she asked her father what was in the distance. He looked at his daughter with tenderness because he saw that she was very happy about this, and such emotions pleased his soul. Hong Heng knew his daughter was photogenic, and every photo was a work of art. Unfortunately, he didn't know when he would be able to spend time with her like this again, so he wanted to take more photos. After a while, he watched with a smile as she stared at the rabbits. They also ate together after all the rides. The young people also didn't forget to visit the circus. He happily took pictures of her next to the animators. They also didn't forget to ride the small carousel. Hong Hyun looked at his daughter tenderly as she admired everything around her. But a moment later, they came to a beautiful and shining Christmas tree. Hun Yun, in turn, did not forget to take a photo of his daughter near the Christmas tree. He looked with joy at the beautiful photographs and assumed that it was time for them to go home. A moment later, he was taken aback as he noticed that his daughter was not there. Hong Heng started looking for his daughter in a hurry as he did not understand where she had gone. But a moment later, he noticed her in the crowd, and at that very moment, he himself darkened and wondered if she really felt sad because her mother wasn't there. Hong Heng slowly approached his daughter as he saw that she was staring at something. At that very moment, the young lady approached her father and said with a smile that he was probably cold. Smiling, she called for warmth. At that very moment, she looked at him with a smile and asked if he felt warm. He sighed heavily, but didn't answer. He understood that it was simply incredible, because from her words, his chilled body was filled with warmth. Charon looked at her father with a smile and said that she had a lot of fun today, and they should definitely return to this place again. He smiled and said that he was very glad that she liked everything, but he understood that he had no reason to be sad. At that very moment, he said with a smile that they would soon return to this park. That same evening, they happily looked through the photographs. Charon smiled and told her father how much she liked everything. She also said with a smile that she really liked this photo. He smiled and asked which photo it was. But at that very moment, she showed him a photo of them together. Hong Heng asked his daughter with a smile if she really enjoyed taking pictures with him. She said that she always felt good with her father. At that moment, he smiled and said that they should take more photos together. Sharon was very happy with such words and agreed with him with a smile. Thanks to his daughter, his day was a success, so he hoped that she could grow up happy. The next day, the young lady joyfully shouted and called for her father. Hong Heng asked his daughter if she wanted to sleep some more, since she had been having fun all day yesterday, but she immediately refused. He thought for a moment as he saw that his daughter always woke up earlier, but he thought that children usually slept a lot. At that very moment, he said with a smile that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Sharon smiled and said that in that case, her father was the best in the world. A moment after he put on his glasses, he hit himself. Hong Heng was puzzled and did not understand how he managed to hit the cabinet. And looking at the cabinet, he noticed that he was seeing double. He sighed heavily as he realized that he had simply hit himself through carelessness. But at that very moment, he realized that he needed to go to the doctor. But after going to the doctor, he found out that his vision had improved. He was shocked because he did not expect anything like this. The doctor advised the young man to contact the Ophthalmology Institute, as he suspected that he might have a serious illness. Hong Hing was puzzled because he understood that the only thing he needed to be completely happy was problems with his vision. After some time, he visited the institute and greeted the professor. She smiled and said that his vision had improved. The young man was shocked. Madame was surprised that his myopia quickly corrected itself. Hong Hing was puzzled and asked if this was a bad thing, but the madam said that it was a rare occurrence. But it was not a bad thing at all. After some time, he bought himself new glasses, and at the same time began to look for a way to improve his vision, but there simply weren't any. He knew that temporary improvements could occur when the time spent interrupting the monitor and using a smartphone was reduced, but this was not the case for him. Han Hyun put all his gadgets aside because he realized he needed to do something other than just lie around all day. At that very moment, he asked his daughter if she wanted to go to the bookstore with him. She smiled and said that she wanted to, and also wanted to read some book. After some time, the young lady admired the store because it had a lot of books. He said with a smile that she could choose whatever she wanted. He was wondering what she would choose, but at that very moment, she shouted that she had already chosen a book. Hong Hing was surprised that his daughter chose a book so quickly. But a moment later, he was even more surprised when he saw that she had chosen mathematics. Hong Hing asked, puzzled if she was sure about my choice, but the girl smiled and said that the book was very interesting. Hong Heng asked his daughter if she had studied mathematics before. Sharon said with a smile that she didn't teach her, but she liked the book, so she wanted to buy it. He knew it was a waste of money. But at that very moment, he said with a smile that she must promise him that she would read it to the end. Sharon smiled and promised her father to read it. He expected to regret the purchase, but he still knew the book was available for purchase. A moment later, they came out into the house, and the young lady happily shouted that she wanted to read her book. Hong Heng looked at his daughter intently and said that he would now prepare dinner, and she could read in the meantime. Hong Heng looked at his daughter with a gentle smile. He had no idea what could be interesting in this book, but he saw how immersed his daughter was in her studies. After some time, the young lady approached her father and called him. He smiled and called her to the table. But at that very moment, she informed him that he should look at it the way she had already done everything. Hong Yun was taken aback by the shock and asked in surprise if she had really solved all the problems Charon said, with a smile that she had tried hard. Hong Hing was taken aback when he saw that his daughter had actually solved all the problems she told him, with a smile to check everything. He was surprised because she hadn't studied in the preparatory class, but had already solved everything without a single mistake. After checking, he noticed that she had decided everything correctly and asked if her mother had taught her something like this. She said that this was not the case and that she had learned it herself. At that very moment, he looked closely at his daughter as he saw that she had an aptitude for mathematics. He understood that the blood of the net was indeed his daughter, since his introduction in childhood was also called a genius of mathematics. Hong Heng smiled and told his daughter that they would have lunch, and later, he would study with her and teach her something new. Yerim asked with delight if this was really so. She joyfully shouted that she loved him. After some time, they were studying diligently, and he noticed that she had mastered service and subtraction very well. Hong Heng knew that he now had to explain multiplication and division to his daughter, but he didn't know if she would be able to remember the multiplication table. Hong Heng smiled and told his daughter that they would now move on to another more difficult task, and she should repeat the multiplication table one by one. After some time, he asked with a smile if she had remembered the table. Yerim said that she remembered everything, but her father assured her that it was okay if she made a mistake somewhere, since she wouldn't be able to remember everything the first time. But at that very moment, the young lady joyfully cried out that this was not so, and she remembered everything. He was taken aback and wondered if his daughter was really that smart. She looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he had just said. Aram was angry with her father because he did not believe that she was smart. He was taken aback and said that he was simply surprised by her knowledge. At that very moment, she puffed out her beautiful cheeks and asked him if he didn't believe she was smart. The young man was taken aback by his task and told us that he believed in it. She was very offended, and at that very moment, she rushed at him and began to ask why he was looking at her like that, because he should have been happy. At that moment, she sighed heavily and said that she had memorized the entire table. He smiled and said that they would practice now. A moment later, he asked her one question. Aram immediately answered him confidently, and at the same time gave the correct answer. At that very moment, he asked her another question. A moment later, the young lady gave him the correct answer with a smile. For some time, he diligently asked her questions, and Yerim answered them with a satisfied smile. At that moment, she happily said that she remembered everything. He was shocked and could not believe such a thing, and therefore assumed that her mother taught her. Aram was puzzled and did not understand why her father did not believe her. Yerim sadly said that since he didn't believe her, it meant she was a liar. He was taken aback and said that he was just a little surprised because he didn't expect something like that. At that very moment, she wrapped herself in a blanket and said that she also would not believe him. He was taken aback and shouted that she was not a liar at all, and he believed her. Hong Heng asked his daughter for forgiveness and said that from now on, he would always believe her. She sighed heavily and looking at her father, said that he should not doubt her. Hong Heng said with a smile that he would not doubt her, and at the same moment asked if she had asked him. She smiled and said that she had forgiven him a long time ago because he was her father. He hugged her tightly and thanked her. But at that very moment, he wondered if her age was being taught multiplication. He thought that most likely his daughter was just a genius. After long lessons, the young lady happily said that she was simply a genius in mathematics. He was shocked at how she could calculate the area of a circle. He couldn't believe that she had learned the preschool curriculum in 1 month. He saw that she had solved not only ordinary problems, but also the most difficult ones, and grasped everything easily and understood the theory very deeply. He understood that with such abilities, she could even win the Fields Medal. But he still wondered where she got such a genetic inclination towards the exact sciences. Hong Heng understood perfectly well that he was completely ordinary in intellect, just like her mother. He had read that children of genius were born regardless of heredity. He had been at a loss ever since he had discovered how intelligent she was, and he knew that if her mother had been there, they could have thought about her education together. Hong Hyun knew she had to make a choice that would affect her future. But such a choice was difficult for one business. He knew that they would soon be going to his parents for the holidays, so he could consult with them, but at the expense of his granddaughter. Sometime later, the young lady happily met her relatives. Hong Heng said they arrived on time and avoided any traffic jams, but they knew the journey would be long and wanted to leave as soon as possible. But at that very moment, the lady looked at her granddaughter in surprise as she fastened her seatbelt herself. Shireen smiled and told her grandmother that her father was teaching her mathematics. Madame was surprised because it was too early. Hong Heng said with a smile that his daughter was smart and that she had mastered the entire school curriculum in a few weeks. His father was shocked because he didn't expect this. Charon offended said that it was true, even her grandfather didn't believe her. They understood that she was smart, but still believed his son that it is better when a child is smarter than a dumbass. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that he now had to give her a proper education. He asked if they had any ideas about this. The man sighed heavily as he was unsure because he had never had to raise a genius in his life. The madam told her son not to rush as he needed time to think about something serious. He sighed heavily and agreed with his mother. He understood that the problem was that he had no one to discuss this issue with. After some time, they came to the rest of the relatives, and all looked at the girl with admiration. She smiled a radiant smile and introduced herself. The lady looked at her brother with a smile and asked if she was really his daughter, since she did not look like him at all. He smiled and said that she was his daughter. Ji Hyuk-hyun asked him if he still hadn't reached her mother. He also advised him to contact a private detective. Hong Heng looked at the young man in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. Ji Hyuk-hyun told him that it didn't seem to occur to him that anything could happen to the baby's mother. Unfortunately for him, they had a rather unpleasant conversation, and as he was leaving, he said that he knew what he should do. Hong Heng was puzzled and wondered if he looked stupid in front of them. But on the other hand, he understood that his relative was right, because he understood that he should have asked his daughter about her mother. Moments later, the young lady asked her father in surprise what he was doing outside. He asked her why she had gone out, as it was cold. She immediately threw herself into his arms and said that she came out as she wanted to warm him. Hong Heng looked at the rain with a smile, as she always took care of him. He saw that she was a very kind child. But at that very moment, he asked if she missed her mother. She smiled a tender smile, and after a short thought, said that she missed him. He understood that she kept all her emotions to herself, but he already wanted to discuss this issue with her when they returned. Hong Heng noticed a moment later that someone was calling him. He was taken aback when he saw that it was his beloved. At that very moment, he picked up the phone and asked us about the problem if it was really her. Bae Yena said with a smile that of course it was her. But at that moment, he couldn't stand it and shouted, because he wanted to know why she didn't pick up the phone when he called. But a moment later, the young lady called out to her father. He realized that he was next to her and calmly asked his beloved where she was and why she didn't answer her calls. She said that she was far away and could not tell him where she was, but she was not hiding from debts because she sent him alimony. At that very moment, he asked her if she missed her daughter, and she said that she missed them very much because she loved them. After these words, he received an answer to the question he had been asking himself ever since his daughter appeared on his doorstep. He accepted the girl as his daughter because he had feelings for her mother, even though they had not seen each other for a long time. He was very angry with her for suddenly leaving him and his daughter, but now she said after a long absence that she loved him. At that moment, Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that he had a serious question for her. Hong Heng looked at his daughter with a puzzled expression, not knowing how to ask his beloved a question while she was still around. He didn't want to ask at all, but he knew he had to. At that very moment, he asked if she had abandoned her daughter for a man. The young lady was very annoyed by such a question. She could not stand it and screamed. She sighed heavily and said that she only had him and her daughter in her life, and she would never abandon them. At that very moment, she said that if she heard something like that from him again, he would be in trouble. He was taken aback and asked for forgiveness. But a moment later, the young man looked into the distance, puzzled, as she affectionately called him by name. She said she loved him and their daughter, so she asked if he could trust her and just wait a little while. He sighed heavily and asked when she would be able to explain everything to him. She was unsure, but she knew that she would tell him everything in time, and so she asked him to wait for her. Hong Heng sighed heavily and asked if she could make him a promise. At that moment, she promised that she would tell him everything. He also told her that their daughter was very smart, and he asked if it was worth sending her to a school for gifted children. Bae Yena said that if his daughter wanted it, he could send her, but nothing would work if it was her own wish because she was a very stubborn girl. Hong Hyun wanted to do everything he could for her, but he didn't have the opportunity to be with her at home. He sighed heavily and said that he wished she were by his side. But at that very moment, he heard that she would send him money so that he could hire a nurse. She said that she would send him as much money as he needed, but such words only irritated him, since he was talking seriously about the child's future. While he was quarreling with his beloved, the young lady trembled with fear and looked at her father with tears in her eyes. Hong Heng shouted angrily that he would raise her himself, and then the mother would have to explain herself to the child. She sighed heavily and told her lover that this was not what she had meant at all. He was puzzled because he didn't want to hang up at all and wondered if he should call her back. Charon looked at her father with confusion and asked if he and her mother had really had a fight. He was taken aback and said that this was not so. At that very moment, he asked if she was really scared that he was shouting, and without hesitation, he asked for forgiveness for something like that. But she still asked him not to quarrel with his mother. He was puzzled, so he showed his worst side to his daughter. Hong Heng told his daughter that she needed to go back into the house because she was cold. He also said that he would join her soon. At that very moment, he dialed his beloved because he knew that he needed to apologize to her. But he was taken aback because her phone was busy. He hoped she hadn't blocked him after their serious conversation, so Hong Heng decided to call her again. But a moment later, he burst into bitter tears as he realized that she had blocked him. Hong Hyun was very annoyed because he understood that if he knew that he would not be able to reach her again, he would have told her that he also loved her. But a moment later, his phone lit up, and he saw a message from her asking for forgiveness. She wrote that she would like to call them more often and talk to her daughter, but it is difficult for her. But he should write to her, and she will answer at any time. Through the messages, he realized that she really wanted to hire a tutor for her daughter, but he still knew it wouldn't be cheap. He hoped she wasn't making money through some illegal means. She was furious and shouted that she was from a rich family and that her parents gave her the money. Hong Heng knew that he could ask his daughter about everything since she did not know how to lie. The next day, the young lady said with a smile that they lived in a very big house, and when she was little, she sometimes got lost in it, and even her uncle couldn't find her. Hong Heng was surprised by this and understood that it sounded incredible. He wanted to know who his beloved's parents really were. The next day, Madame asked her son if there was something wrong with his beloved, since she had heard that he had spoken about her with his relatives the day before. Hong Hyun said with a smile that she was fine, and that he had called her. The lady excitedly asked her son if he would look for her, but he assured her that everything was fine, since the girls had family matters. He assumed that her family was rich, and she was now fighting over some inheritance, and it was logical that the heirs were quarreling with each other. Sharon smiled and told her father that she had seen many stars in the sky at night, and that she had also eaten deliciously, and that was why she wanted to visit her relatives again. He looked at his daughter with a smile and said that they would definitely come again. He sighed heavily as he realized that he now had to take on his daughter's education on his own. A week later, he visited the ophthalmologist again and was told that his vision had improved. Madame insisted that she could not miss such an opportunity. She wanted to study it and write a dissertation. Hong Heng asked if he needed to wear glasses now. She looked at him with a smile and said that it was obvious that he no longer needed glasses and their services. The young man was taken aback, as he did not expect anything like this, but at the same time he was bursting with joy. After many years of constantly wearing glasses, this was a real joy for him, but he still wondered how something like this could happen to him. Hong Heng stopped and looked closely at the reflection, as he had never seen it so clearly before without his glasses. He understood that all his friends would be surprised and say that he had laser correction. But now he enjoyed the view as he noticed that he was quite attractive without his glasses. But a moment later, he was taken aback as all his thoughts were driven away by the telephone call. Chan Su called his friend and started complaining that it had been difficult to get through to him lately. He was surprised and puzzled as they had not communicated for a whole month. Hong Heng sighed heavily, knowing that not everything in his life was so rosy. But at that very moment, his friend asked him if he was really planning to get married. Hong Heng said with a smile that this was not the case, and that he had other reasons. At that moment, he was taken aback and wondered why he had hidden his daughter from his acquaintances, since she was, after all, his legitimate daughter. Hong Heng shouted to his friend that if he and everyone else wanted to know about him so much, they could come to his house. Hong Heng, in turn, was puzzled because he knew that he had invited his friend himself, but he knew the friend, and he could arrange a circus tent. A moment later, he entered the house with a smile and greeted his daughter. She looked at him intently and asked with a smile why he was without glasses, but at the same moment, she said that it looked better for him. He was puzzled because she said that his glasses were thick, but she said with a smile that he was now handsome. Sharon threw herself into her father's arms and told him that he shouldn't wear them anymore. Hong Heng smiled and said that he would now walk without glasses. But in the meantime, he asked what she was doing. She said that she was solving problems, and then she saw something interesting on the computer. She said that she watched how beautiful people danced. He said with a smile that this group is very popular. But at that very moment, she said that she would make her father cooler than them. Hong Heng smiled and thanked his daughter for such words, but he knew that it would be very difficult to do. At that very moment, she said that she would make him cool and he should believe her. He smiled and said that he believed her. He knew it would be nice if he was cool just for his daughter, so he wanted to pay attention to his appearance and what he wore. That same evening, he asked his daughter to wait a little as he wanted to cook her something tasty. But a moment later, he wondered what side dish to choose. But at that very moment, the young lady informed her father that someone had come to them. Hong Heng was taken aback when he saw that his friend had arrived with his other comrades. The young lady asked her father who had come to see him. He said that they were his friends and asked if she would mind if they had dinner together. She said with a smile that surely some poor uncles had come to him to eat, and her mother had taught her that one should help the poor so that they could stay. At that very moment, he opened the door and his friend looked into the house. But a moment later, he was taken aback and cried out as he saw a little girl. His comrades started shouting at him because he was holding them up, and it was cold outside and they wanted to get in quickly. At that very moment, he said with admiration and trembling that there was an elf in front of him. The young people were puzzled and pushed their friend to hurry into the apartment. But moments later, they too were taken aback and stood frozen in shock. Changsu shouted to his friend in surprise that he was looking at a little elf, but he only smiled and said that it was his daughter. Changsu looked at his friend with a puzzled expression and said that he would like to know without joking who was in front of him. He said with a smile that it was indeed his daughter. At that very moment, the young lady greeted them with a smile and said that her father was next to hers. The young people were taken aback and shouted in unison that this simply couldn't be, and that she was most likely adopted. Hong Heng was puzzled by his friend's words and said that she was his biological daughter, but he also asked why they came. Chang Su said that he was thinking about her. They could have a drink, so they came with full bags. After a long, short conversation, they decided to just have dinner and not drink in front of the child, but they still did not believe him that it was his daughter. A moment later, the young man presented the document to his friends, and they were taken aback by shock as she really was his daughter. They told their friend that they found it hard to believe. Hong Hing looked at his friends intently and said that they should go into the house and he would tell them everything over dinner. Hong Hing told his friends the whole story about his daughter at dinner, and they noticed that she was very beautiful. He said with a smile that she was really very beautiful. Chang Su said that the girl was beautiful and that he was very lucky if she had inherited his appearance. She would have been in trouble. But at that very moment, he received a very strong blow from his comrade's response, because he took his words seriously and not as a joke. His friends also noticed that he had been looking much better lately, and with his new guilt, people could believe that she was his daughter. He looked at them with a smile, as he was pleasantly surprised by such words. At that moment, the young lady happily said that her father was the most handsome in the world. They looked at her with a smile, as she was very sweet. The young man also told his friends that he has a very smart daughter, and he is not lying at all. At that very moment, the young man said that they would now check whether this was true or not. A moment later, the young lady began to solve the equation. After some thought, she happily presented them with a ready-made answer. They were shocked because they could not believe that a young lady of such an age could solve something so complex. They said that she was beautiful, smart, and she was very happy with such praise. The young man told his friend that his daughter would have great success in life. Hong Hing's expression faded for a moment as he realized that he needed to raise his daughter properly, but he knew that he couldn't do it on his own. After all, by the time he finally defends his dissertation, she will already know the entire high school course in mathematics. Changsu looked at his friend and told him to listen to him carefully. Changsu said with a smile that the university held the Olympiad for shock athletes every April, and therefore he could enroll his daughter. He was skeptical, but his friend said that in the world, connections decide everything, and they had them. Hong Heng sighed heavily and told his friend that he didn't expect much from this venture, but it was still worth a try. The next day, the young man called his friend and arranged a meeting for Friday. He said that he had made an agreement with a professor who would be on the jury, and his daughter simply needed to take a test before the Olympiad. Hong Heng was shocked by everything he heard, but he still agreed. He knew his daughter was a genius, but he still couldn't help but be nervous as she was about to be put to the test. He wondered if his standards of genius were too low. But at that very moment, he was taken aback as his daughter approached him and asked what he was thinking about. He understood that he didn't need to worry so much, because no matter what happened, she would always be his daughter. Hong Hung hugged his daughter tightly and said with a smile that he would love her, even if she was not a genius. She said with a smile that she loved him too. Professor Bayek Nahi greeted the young lady and introduced herself. Charon greeted her back with a joyful smile and also introduced herself. Baek Nahaye smiled and told the young man that his daughter was smart and that she had prepared some questions for her. Baek Nahaye told the girl with a smile that she must solve everything she could within a certain period of time. The young man was puzzled because he knew that his daughter had not solved the problem for some time, and so he was worried. But after the allotted time, she happily gave the professor all the documents since she had done everything. Baek Nahaye was surprised, but still wanted to check the test and make sure the girl answered everything correctly. Hong Hung agreed to wait a little longer with a smile, but he was still very nervous. At that moment, Charon looked at her father with a smile and said that she really hoped that she had succeeded. He smiled and said again that he loved her regardless of the outcome. Charon said with a satisfied smile that she loved him very much. After a while, he was taken aback as the professor announced that she had checked the test. He did not know what to do as he was full of anticipation, and therefore wanted to know as soon as possible what the result of his daughter was. Baek Nahaye was surprised to tell the young man that his daughter did well on the test, and she also praised hers. He didn't understand what would happen in the end, but she said that the girl was a genius. He was taken aback and froze in place. The madame said with a smile that the young lady had great success in her bright future. She also asked the young man if he had ever thought about sending her to a school for gifted children. He didn't know if she was the right age, but she said the girl had a chance. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she wanted to go to school. Charon said that if she went there with her father, then she agreed. He said that he would not be able to study with her, and she firmly refused. He knew that her opinion was more important in this matter. The lady smiled and said that she understood everything, but if their opinion changed, they should call her. As he was leaving the office, the young man met his friend and told him that his daughter was a genius. Chansu asked what the professor said. He smiled and said that she had recommended sending her to a school for the gifted, but his daughter had refused. Changsu was puzzled because he thought she would be the first child to receive the Nobel Prize. Changsu asked his friend with a smile if he wanted to take his daughter to class with him. He was taken aback and said that she would probably be bored, but the young lady stated that she wanted to go to class with her father. Hong Heng said that the classes lasted for a very long time, so he didn't know if she could sit still. She said that she watched the film for a long time and didn't get tired, and she would be able to go to classes. He smiled and said that if she wasn't bored, he could take her with him, and she happily threw herself into his arms. At that very moment, the young lady kissed her father with a smile and said that he was the best. Chang Su looked at his friend with puzzlement and asked if his cheeks were really covered in honey. While they were not attending classes, he decided to teach his daughter English, and she showed her genius even in foreign languages. He was shocked, as he had taught her the most basic rules of grammar, and knew that she would soon be able to speak like a native speaker. Hong Heng realized that he had already run out of subjects that he could teach his daughter. Hong Heng knew that his daughter had already pulled ahead in several subjects. At that very moment, Sharon noticed a beautiful aunt who was playing the piano. At that very moment, he asked with a smile if she wanted to learn to play the piano. She smiled and said that it was a wonderful activity and she would like to learn with him. He said that he didn't have time and he could send her to music school, but she flatly refused because without her father, she was not interested in. At that very moment, he asked his daughter what she wanted to study. Sharon said that she wants to study with him because everything is interesting with him. He was a little puzzled because he understood that she wanted him to teach her, but he knew that he could not sit at home with her all his life. Hong Hing knew that to understand his daughter, he would have to try different subjects, but he had neither the money nor the time. At that very moment, he asked his daughter if she wanted to go to the library because they could find books there, and she would say that she liked them. She smiled and said that they should go together. Some time later, they came to the library, but the girl asked for forgiveness since the girl was too young to be allowed into the library. Hong Heng smiled and said that his daughter was very obedient and they would not interfere. She sighed heavily and said that she agreed to let them in, but if they made noise, she would escort them. They thanked her and bowed. A moment later, they were not sleeping, but walking towards the library. But everyone was looking at them intently. Hong Eng told his daughter with a smile that there were a lot of books in the library, and she could choose the ones she liked. The young lady happily agreed with him and immediately rushed off to search. After some time, she found a book for herself and happily said that she liked it. But while they slowly followed them, everyone watched intently. Hong Hing was puzzled because he saw that people were keeping an eye on his daughter, but he was glad that she was interested in the establishment. A moment later, he noticed that someone was calling him. He was surprised because it was his former professor calling him. At that very moment, he told his daughter that he would go outside as he had an urgent call. But a moment later, the young lady's expression changed as she noticed who had called his father and wondered if he really wanted to quarrel with his father. Hong Hing went outside and answered the call, but at that moment, he was taken aback as the professor shouted angrily and insulted him. Hong Hing asked the professor in bewilderment what he was even talking about. He stated that he had reported the embezzlement of the budget to the police. Hong Hing was puzzled and did not understand what was going on, but the professor was screaming in rage because he knew that the young man had betrayed him. The professor shouted angrily at the young man that he would give him a fun life. Hong Hung S. angrily told the professor that he did not know what evidence he had, and that he and others could also testify against him. The professor was angry that the young man threatened him, and therefore did not hide his contempt, and various statements addressed to him. Hong Hing was burning with anger and fury, and at that very moment he wanted to tell everything to the professor. But a moment later he was taken aback as he felt the presence of his daughter. At that very moment, he told the professor that he would not talk to him and turned off the phone. Charon asked her father if everything was okay. He smiled and said that everything was fine, and also asked why she came out like that as she was reading a book. Then she sighed heavily and said that she didn't want to read anymore and wanted to go home. Hong Hung looked at his daughter intently and said that he understood everything and that they would go home immediately. That same evening, he talked to his friend and told him that the professor had called him, and he thought that he had passed it. His friend was puzzled by what he heard, but they also agreed to meet in the lab to check everything. At that moment, he looked at his daughter with a smile and asked if she wanted to go to her grandmother's, since he would be busy tomorrow. He sighed heavily and said that he had a lot to do tomorrow, and therefore he would like her to stay with her grandmother. Sharon was a little puzzled because she wanted to be close to him. He sighed heavily and said with disappointment that he would also like this, but unfortunately, he could not be with her all the time. Sharon didn't want to part with him at all, but she knew she simply had no choice. Hong Hung thanked his daughter with a smile for understanding him. After some time, the young lady looked closely at her father and noticed that he was sleeping, but she still wanted him to sleep soundly, so she used her magic. At that very moment, she rose up because she knew that the time had already come to punish the sinners. She was very angry because she knew that she needed to get to the professor's house. At that very moment, she used her power as she intended to find his house. After a few minutes of short searching, she finally found him. Sharon went to the man, but saw him in a paid state. She saw that he was drinking and shouting with rage that everyone would pay. Sharon glared at the man as she wanted to embarrass him in front of everyone. The man was furious, he screamed, and threw everything he could get his hands on. Sharon looked at the man closely, as she realized that he would soon be broken himself. But she saw that he was aggressive, and she understood perfectly well that she couldn't leave everything to chance, so she used her magic. She understood that her work was finished, but she herself wanted to punish him, but she knew that it was forbidden. She didn't want to, but she understood that she would have to go somewhere. She knew that she had things to do all night today. The next day, Sharon asked her father not to go anywhere. He looked at her intently and said with a smile that she had promised to stay with her grandmother. He said that he could not stay. He said that he simply could not allow the villainous professor to remain free because he posed a great danger to them. He looked closely at his daughter and asked if something was bothering her, but she didn't answer. But at that very moment, she threw herself into her father's arms and said that she had always obeyed him and would try this time. He smiled and thanked her. The couple looked closely at their son and anxiously asked him not to get into trouble and to be careful. Hong Hyun said with a smile that they didn't need to worry about him and that they should just look after his daughter. The young lady, in turn, looked intently after her father. She knew that he did not need to do anything, since the professor would break down on his own. She knew everything in advance, but unfortunately, she couldn't tell her father. But at the same time, she really wanted to play with him. After some time, the young man came to the laboratory to see his friends. They looked at him closely and said that the professor had also called them, but he had made them very angry. Hong Heng asked his friends if they had found anything. At that moment, he was informed that they had found financial statements on his computer. Hong Heng was taken aback when he read the report because he saw how much the professor had stolen. Chang-su smiled and suggested looking at other orders as he thought that the statute of limitations for many crimes had not yet expired. Hong Heng looked at all of the professor's reports with puzzlement as he realized that the professor had stolen a lot. But a moment later, the young man shouted and called all his comrades. At the same moment, they read an article about a place for reporting sexual harassment to the police, while the professor attempted to murder a student. They were so shocked when her news spread online. But at the same time, they wondered if the professor had really attacked their colleague with a knife. Chang-su sighed heavily and said that it was hard to believe, but it was still a fact, and he was glad that she was not hurt. Hong Hing understood that the professor was a thief, but he was surprised that he would resort to murder. A moment later, the young man, trembling with fear, asked what would happen to them if they testified against him. The young people were puzzled because they feared for their lives and the lives of their families. Hun Heng, smiling, suggested to his comrades that they select the necessary files and send them to the police by email. The young people were puzzled, but still whispered among themselves and discussed the situation. Hong Hung wanted to take revenge on the professor, but he drove himself into the grave himself. But at the same time, he was glad that everything ended well. Sometime later, he met his daughter, and she asked, puzzled, if he had been drinking. Hong Heng smiled and said that he only drank a little. Sharon said that alcohol was bad for his health, and he shouldn't drink anymore. Sharon looked at her father and asked if he had done all his chores. He hesitated and said that he had sorted out everything he wanted to tell her everything, but he didn't know if he should do it. She said that if he didn't tell her everything, she would be offended. At that very moment, he told his daughter about the professor and said that he deserved it. He, of course, was satisfied with this outcome, but he was still irritated. Sharon smiled and told her father that she had said earlier that the professor would break down on his own even if he did nothing. He asked in surprise if she knew something like this would happen. She smiled and said that bad things happen to bad people. But at that very moment, she said with a smile that he didn't need to worry. He looked at her in surprise. Meanwhile, Sharon, with a radiant smile, told her father that she would definitely protect him. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief and thanked her. They walked slowly back home, and she said with a smile that he was tired today, and so she would give him a massage. He thanked her. After some time, she noticed that her father was sleeping, but she also saw that his eyes were almost healed. She wanted to raise her eyes a little more, but she knew there were other parts of her body that needed to be treated. Sharon knew that it was impossible to treat everything at once, and so she wanted to make him beautiful this time. At that very moment, she used her beautiful power as she wanted. Sharon wanted him to be attractive. After a few minutes, Sharon finished her manipulations, and a moment later, with a joyful and contented smile, she wished him good night. The next day, the young man read an article in the newspaper about his former professor and that he had been arrested. Hong Heng sighed heavily, knowing that they had sorted out all the problems, and he could now return to searching for research positions. But at that very moment, he turned around and looked intently at his daughter. He understood that in addition to work, he should think about his daughter's education, or rather what and how to teach her. He realized that he had taught her almost everything in the scientific field, and only art and sports remained. Hong Heng first wanted to buy a musical instrument and teach his daughter to play, but he understood that without him, she would not show interest in such things, so he wanted to learn to play himself. Hong Heng practiced secretly for several days, and after some time, he achieved good results, and his daughter happily praised him. Sharon looked at her father with shining eyes and asked him to teach her to play. He was glad that she was interested in the instrument. After some time, he showed his daughter how to play correctly. Hong Heng explained to her, and she asked with a playful smile if she was pressing everything correctly. At that very moment, the young lady was playing the instrument with a joyful smile. He was shocked because he had only just taught her, and she was already able to play a song. Han Hyun was surprised that she managed to play the first time. She said with a smile that today was the first time she played. Hong Hing looked at his daughter with a look of surprise, as he realized that she was more than just a genius. He was pleased with his daughter because he understood that she was the genius of the entire century. He knew the geniuses of the Renaissance, who became famous in the fields of art, mathematics, architecture, and philosophy. He understood that his daughter was simply a goddess of truth. But a moment later, he put all his thoughts aside, as he understood that it would not come to that because she was not that brilliant. Hong Hing also understood that her genius was beyond his capabilities, and he felt sorry to waste her talent. He understood that she would be happy with anything as long as they were doing something together. He understood that this talent was very rare, and he did not want to trample it into the dirt. The next day, the young man asked his friend what would be the best way to occupy his daughter. Hong Hing Gavril told his friend that the loss of such a genius as his daughter would be a great loss for humanity. Chan Su told his friend that his daughter only wants to do what he does. Chang Su told his friend that he shouldn't force her to do anything. He said that his friend should leave his daughter alone and she would find something to do on her own. Hong Hing sighed heavily and thanked his friend for the advice. After a short conversation, the young man told his friend that at this rate, his daughter would only learn bad things from him. Hong Hing was angry when he heard such words and wanted to deal with his friend, but he quickly ran away because someone called him. Hong Hyun was puzzled and realized that his friend was just being mean, as he always ruined the moment. However, his friend helped him get his head straight because Togo himself, without knowing it, almost began to force his daughter to study under the pretext of wasting talents. He understood that she could learn anything, but if it was against her will, she would not be happy. Hong Hung knew very well that the most important thing was that she should be happy. At that moment, a young man approached him and asked if he knew Professor Choi Uthik. He said he knew me. His friend said that he spoke to his professor, and he said that he wanted to meet his daughter. Hong Hung was surprised and puzzled because he did not expect anything like this and did not understand why the professor would meet with them. Chang Su smiled and told his friend that he should find time, as it would be nice to meet the professor before the start of the semester. The professor specialized in neural sciences and was known for his generosity and great abilities. Hong Hung knew that nothing bad would happen if he met the professor. He also knew that the professor was a good person and nothing serious would happen, and he thanked his friend for his efforts. The next day, the young lady happily walked with her father to the university. She looked closely at her father and asked if the professor was bullying him. To be honest, during his university years, he devoted only one subject to it. It turned out that he tried very hard in class, but in the end received a low grade. And when he came to him to find out the reason, the professor said that this was his maximums. At that time, he deeply regretted his choice of course, and he understood that the professor had already appeared in a bad light. Hong Hing told his daughter that he couldn't get a good grade, but the professor was a good man. He himself was very excited, but asked his daughter not to worry. He hoped that they would not embarrass themselves during the conversation with the professor. After some time, the young people entered the office and greeted the professor. The professor greeted them with a smile and said that he had heard a lot about his daughter, and he remarked that she was very beautiful. The professor smiled and invited them to sit down and treat them to some cookies. Charon enjoyed the cookies with a smile and thanked the professor. He said with a smile that she could enjoy the cookies, and also said that it seemed like having a daughter like her made every day filled with happiness. Hong Heng smiled and said that in difficult times, one look at his daughter filled him with strength, and he asked the professor why he had called them. Hong Heng told the professor that he heard that he was working in the field of artificial intelligence. The professor said he believed the key to creating artificial intelligence lies in the human brain. At that moment, he realized that the professor wanted to use his daughter as a model for research. He smiled and said that he had been told about the girl's incredible abilities, so she participated in the upcoming competition. Hong Hung was surprised that the professor also participated. He said with a smile that artificial intelligence has been around for many years now, but he was interested in the children who scored the highest scores in the competition. He said that the professor had recently brought him the results of the young lady's mental abilities test, so he immediately made an appointment. The professor said that if they didn't mind, he would like her to become the subject of his research. He looked at them closely and asked what they thought about it. Hong Heng asked the professor if it was dangerous. The professor immediately said that he would not expose the child to danger. At that very moment, the professor asked the young man why he didn't resume his studies at his research centers. The professor smiled and said that he saw that the young man had potential. Hong Heng said that the professor gave him a low grade, and that made him think that he was not inclined towards his specialty. The professor was taken aback and told the young man that it seemed he had simply confused him. Hong Heng froze in surprise. Professor Choi Uthacom looked closely at the young man and said that he had given him a low grade, and at the same time, she had to fuel his passion and desire to learn science. He said that he believed that the young man could become an outstanding man of science, since most people already showed signs of learning in their student years. But his were strong and green. He immediately looked at the young lady and asked with a smile if she agreed with him. She smiled and said that, according to the century, her father was very smart, and he explained mathematics to her well. The professor smiled and told the young man that no one could deceive his eyes after all. And at the same time, he now sat down, regretting that the young man had chosen Professor Chang as his mentor. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that he had not chosen the professor out of personal sympathy. The professor noted that the young man had been through a lot, but still he wanted to give the young man a little advice. He said that it was not at all good to put oneself down too much. He looked closely at the young man, and with a gentle smile said that he was quite a capable student, so he should be confident in himself. It was the first time he heard such praise, because his previous professor made him doubt about receiving a doctorate, and because of him, he thought that all professors used students as expendable material for their own gain. But he hoped that, under the leadership of the new professor, he would be able to gain recognition and focus on research again. At that moment, he thanked the professor with a smile. The professor said with a smile that they should not delay, and that they would start working together this week. Sometime later, the young lady happily asked her father if they would really go to university together every day from now on. He smiled and said that not every day but often. Charon said with a smile that she liked everything, and she liked the fact that the professor said that her father would also be involved in the research. The young man was puzzled, but looked at his daughter as he did not know how to break the news to her. At that moment, he said that because of classes, he would not be able to go with her to the study. She was taken aback and froze in shock as she expected something completely different. Charon was shocked and screamed that the professor said that they would be together, sighed heavily, and said that he was going to tell the professor that it would be difficult for him to participate in the research. Charon looked away, and with tears in her eyes said that she didn't want to be there alone. At that very moment, he said with a smile that he was joking, because he couldn't leave her alone. Charon was taken aback and asked if this was really true. She looked closely at her father and asked if he was lying to her to calm her down. He smiled and said that she did not need to worry, as he would definitely see her off, since she did not want to part with him so much. Charon said irritably that she didn't want to break up with him and asked him not to joke like that anymore. He said with a smile that he wouldn't joke anymore, so she shouldn't be angry. The next day, the professor greeted the young people with joy, as he was very pleased that they had come. Hong Heng thanked the professor with a smile for his warm welcome, but at the same time, he asked what they should do. The professor said that, first of all, the young lady should study everything because he planned to model artificial intelligence through learning. At that moment, she asked if her father would be with her. She breathed a sigh of relief when she found out that she would be with her father, as she was worried about being left alone. The professor smiled and said that he saw that she was very worried about this, but her father would look after her. At that moment, he looked at them intently and announced that it was time for them to begin their exploration. The main goal of the study was to explore the limits of brain activity during learning. The professor used the high school curriculum as the basis for testing intelligence, and with it, the speed of learning reached astonishing heights. Hong Heng looked at his daughter with a smile as he tried to delay her education, but he saw that there was no point in it, as she was a quick learner. The professor looked closely at the young lady and asked the young man if he thought she was incredible. He also said that if he could simulate the girl's brain, the age of artificial intelligence would arrive many years earlier. He said that the young lady was the first person in recent times who had managed to ignite his spirit of exploration. Hong Heng apologized for interfering with his ardent aspirations, but he informed the professor that they would not be able to visit him every day. After his words, the professor decided Hong Hyun said that his classes start next week, and it will be difficult to visit him often, and his daughter is ready to be with him only in the lab. The professor noticed that the young lady loved her father very much, and he understood that he would not be able to convince her or. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that it seemed so. But at that very moment, the professor shouted that the word impossible was not in his vocabulary, and for the sake of the girl, he would change the entire interior of the laboratory. At that very moment, his laboratory turned into a children's room, but the young lady told the professor that without her father, she was not interested in anything. Hong Heng, looking at the professor, warned him in advance that he was graduating in June and was planning to get a job as a research fellow at a private enterprise, so they could only conduct research until a certain time. The man was shocked by everything he heard, as he understood that he would need at least a year to complete these studies. The professor looked at him intently and asked if he knew that their Information Technology Research Center was looking for research specialists. The young man was taken aback and said that it was the first time he had heard of such a thing. At that very moment, the professor presented him with a document and told him to sign it immediately. He was shocked, as it was all very sudden. But a moment later, he was taken aback, as he realized that he could get a position under the professor, and if he put one signature, he would definitely be accepted. The professor said with a smile that he would give him a research fellow position, and that he just needed to continue participating in research. Hong Heng thanked the professor for the offer, but he knew that his future depended on it, so he needed to think about it for a while. The professor looked at him intently and asked, "Didn't you agree to work under him last time?" He didn't agree to work under his supervision, but now he claimed the opposite. The professor also told the young man to think carefully because he now had a daughter, and other research centers would not look at their circumstances in the same way. Hong Heng sighed heavily as he understood everything perfectly well, but there was a place where he wanted to try to get a job. The professor said that they could give him free time in exchange, and they would not keep them long. He looked at the girl intently and asked if she wanted her dad to earn a lot of money, or for him to play with her a lot. She shouted that she liked it better when he played with her. Hong Heng thought for a moment as he realized that the professor was right, but he couldn't make a decision so quickly. The professor told the young man that there was no other place in the whole country where he would be received with such warmth. The professor realized that he had failed to inspire confidence in him and that this was his mistake. At that very moment, he told the girl that her father preferred to earn money rather than play with her. She was taken aback because she knew that this could not be. Hong Heng was puzzled and did not understand at what point everything went wrong. At that very moment, the professor took the proposal sheet from the young man and said that they would forget about it. Hong Heng was shocked because he saw that he was being pressured from all sides. Charon looked at father closely and said that she was having fun participating in research with him, but now he wanted to go somewhere else. At that hour, he shouted and stopped the professor. The professor, with a predatory grin, asked if he had really made up his mind. His expression changed very quickly, and he asked the young man to quickly fill out the form. Hong Heng was puzzled because he had the feeling that he had been dragged in by force. He understood that the professor had only made him an offer, and he could not guarantee that he would be suitable for this position. But he was happy because he knew he would be able to watch his daughter grow up, so he assumed he had made the right choice. The research proceeded smoothly, and the professor offered Charon different learning methods and situations because he wanted to study and model the reactions of her brain. And after some time, the young man with a joyful smile wished his daughter good luck on her exam. Charon, with a satisfied smile, asked her father whose daughter she was. She confidently stated that of course she would pass with excellent marks. As she ran away, she said that she would definitely pass the exam well, and he should take her to have fun on Children's Day. The professor greeted the young man with a smile and asked him to hurry up. He smiled and said that his daughter was not worried even though it was her first time taking an exam in front of other people. Hong Heng smiled and said that she even seemed calm to him, but at the same time, he didn't know who she got her nerves from. The professor told the young man with a smile that she looked very much like him. He also said that he had heard him speak to the director of the great corporation. At that very moment, Hong Hyun Na asked the professor if he could reconsider the decision regarding the senior student's lecture. The professor said there was no need for that, and since he had already deemed him qualified enough, Hong Hung became very agitated and said that if he were to disgrace himself, it would damage the institute's image. Professor Choi Uthakam asked the young man when he was giving his report whether there were many people who asked questions that had no clear meaning. He was taken aback and said that no one had ever asked anything like that. At the same moment, the professor said with a smile that this was proof of his successful report. The young man thanked the professor for calming him down before his speech. The professor said with a smile that this was why he had asked him to give the lecture. Hong Heng said that he understood everything and would definitely do everything in his power not to let them down. After some time, he quietly gathered his strength, but at the same time, he was already announced. When he stepped onto the stage, he was taken aback because he saw that there were more students than he had expected. And besides, it was difficult to watch the children applauding, as if someone was sucking their souls out of them. He understood that he could not allow them to get bored, as they might fall asleep. Hong Hyun-S looked at them with a satisfied grin, as he had prepared trump cards that would not leave any applicant indifferent. At that moment, he looked closely at everyone present and introduced himself and greeted them. But a moment later, he asked who among them knew where their institute was. Nobody answered him, as when they were at the lecture, they were not interested. At that very moment, the young man with a radiant smile began to tell where exactly their institute was located and why it was cooler than all the others. At that very moment, everyone started whispering. He smiled and said that their research center had prepared a lecture that should help all applicants. Namely, this lecture will help them find a way to improve their grades. At that moment, everyone looked at him intently as the topic had interested them. Hong Hyun looked at them with a satisfied smile because he knew that the best time for students was the entrance exams and grades. He was glad that he managed to attract their interest and attention. At that moment, he continued his lecture, and everyone listened to him with sincere interest. Han Hing said their center is studying the connection between the brain and the computer. He continued to tell about everything with interest. He simply expressed his speech in connection with the objectives of the research and its results, with academic achievements, and at the same time achieved the absolute attention of the students. At that very moment, he joked about something with a smile. The young people were very surprised, as they did not expect such a thing, but they realized that he still had a peculiar sense of humor. Hong Heng was puzzled because he realized that he had wrongly trusted his friend with the joke part. Some time later, the young lady thanked him with joy for the excellent lecture. He said that there was no need to thank him, as he was glad that the children had listened to him attentively. She smiled and said that it was the first time she had seen them behave like that during someone else's performance, and no one even dozed off, and everyone asked a lot of questions. At that very moment, she told him about this joke. He was taken aback and said that he was extremely sorry about it, but she still thanked him for the wonderful lecture he had given and said that she very much hoped that another opportunity would arise and they would meet him again. Hong Hung was pleased with himself, as this was the first time he had given such a successful lecture, since reports had always been a burden to him. The new discovery and success excited him. Hong Heng understood that if he was asked to perform again, he would agree. But after a few moments, he threw his thoughts away as he was interested in the main question. Did his daughter pass the exam because he heard that the exam was very difficult? A moment later, he opened the door and told his daughter that he had come to see her. A moment later, he asked how the exam had gone, but he was taken aback when he saw that his daughter was sitting quietly. Hong Heng asked the professor in confusion what had happened. He also wondered if his daughter had failed the exam. The professor sighed heavily and said that the questions were more difficult this time, but he didn't think they were that much more difficult. He said that the girl had handed in the examination sheet less than an hour after it had begun, and she was still in the room, but at that very moment, the young lady burst into tears and called for her father. He was surprised that less than an hour had passed, and she had handed everything in. The professor said that, to be more precise, she handed in the work after 45 minutes from the start, and he even personally checked the camera. Hong Heng was puzzled by how difficult the tasks were. He knew that it seemed like the exam was too hard for her. Hong Heng immediately hugged his daughter because he realized that it was difficult for her to pass the exam, and that was why she was sad because of him. She immediately asked if the other guys were upset because she had decided everything too early. He looked at her in surprise and asked what her words meant. At that very moment, they said with joyful smiles that she had completed the task quickly and that it was an easy task. Charon said with a smile that she had solved all the problems and now he should praise her. He was shocked that she had solved everything, had managed to check it, and yet the tasks were too easy. At that very moment, the professor told the young man to check everything himself. During the test, he shouted in confusion that these problems were designed for the final years of university, but she solved everything correctly. The professor said with a satisfied smile that she had solved everything correctly, and even the course of the solution was perfect. At that moment, he looked at them in bewilderment, and they joyfully shouted that they had simply decided to play a joke on him. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that he didn't even understand everything that had happened and had let himself be fooled. The professor smiled and said that the young lady's learning abilities exceeded their expectations. The professor asked if the young man knew any geniuses who had already achieved great heights at a young age. He looked closely at the girl and informed her father that his daughter had the same superb talent, and if raised properly, she would change world history. Hong Heng was shocked by what he heard the professor said, with a smile that the young man should consider this a blessing and raise her according to his conscience, but at the same time, he should quickly find the child's mother. Hong Heng's face darkened at that moment, and he said that he would like to, but it was not that simple. After a moment, he looked at the professor in surprise and asked if there was something on his face since he was staring at him intently. The professor looked at him in surprise and said that he didn't have anything on his face. He just looked really good lately, and it looked like he had recently started taking active care of his skin. Hong Heng immediately said that he had done nothing of the sort. The professor thought for a moment and said that he had been eavesdropping on the students' conversations, and they reported that the young man began to look after himself because he was going to get married. Hong Heng was taken aback by shock, as he did not expect anything like this. Hong Heng was puzzled and did not understand why such rumors were spreading. He hoped that everyone had a sense of privacy, but the professor assured him that gossip spread quickly in the center. At that moment, he asked the professor why everyone suddenly started talking about his marriage. The professor asked if he really cared about his skin because of the upcoming wedding. While they were having a casual conversation, the young lady looked at them with a contented smile. At that very moment, she smiled and said that it was all because of the massage she gave Dad every night, because she promised to make him as handsome as the brothers who performed. At that very moment, the professor said with a smile that in his place he would have grown many years younger simply by looking at his beautiful daughter. But a moment later, the professor sternly told him not to do anything that could have a negative impact on the girl's mental state. The professor said sternly that he didn't care at all what was going on in his personal life, but if he offended the girl, they would talk differently. Hong Heng sighed heavily, knowing he needed to find a use for himself. Hong Heng was puzzled as he realized that he was simply his daughter's toy. At the time, it seemed to him that the rumors about his wedding would quickly die down, but he was wrong. He looked at his friend with bewilderment, not understanding why he was looking at him so intently. The young man wanted to know what his friend had done to his skin, that it had become so beautiful. He asked if his friend was really planning to get married. Hong Heng asked his friend in confusion if he really thought that he would leave his daughter for a woman. He said that he had no reason to be stressed lately. At that very moment, the young man agreed with his friend, since he had already decided to become a student and research assistant of the professor, and now he did not have to worry about grades. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that there was nothing to envy, since he also had doubts. The young man told his friend that his only concern he knew was attendance, and if he didn't miss anything, his place was in the bag. Hong Heng said the center offered him good conditions, and he joined, but he still wanted to think about what would happen next. The young man sighed heavily and said that his friend could easily solve the army's problems. However, his struggles to find a job after his service were real. After all, the artificial intelligence research at the center did not correspond to his specialty. He understood that it would be better to get a job at a large company. But he heard that recently they were very quick to fire an employee, and he had never worked in such large organizations before. He had already made a decision, but his thoughts were depressing him. At that very moment, he turned around as he heard a familiar voice. Leader Yan looked at the young man with a smile and greeted him. Hong Hing looked at the manager in surprise and asked what brought him to such a place. The manager said that he had dropped by the university for work. Hong Hong smiled and asked if he had a new project. The manager smiled and said that there was no way around it, but he just had a conversation with the young man, so he suggested having a cup of coffee. Hong Hing was surprised because he didn't expect this, but the leader insisted that they talk. Hong Hing knew very well that the only thing he could talk to him about was the position of a researcher, so he wondered if the leader really wanted to offer him another offer. He understood that if the conversation was going to be about this, then he would have to make a clear decision. At that very moment, he agreed with a smile. A moment later, they were already sitting in the cafe, and the manager asked the young man if he had thought about what he had told him earlier. The manager smiled and said that at the end of April, they would begin accepting applications to join their scientific research. Hong Hung was surprised and puzzled, but he saw that the leader was talking seriously about such things. Several months passed after the management suggested something like this to him. He was surprised that the manager remembered about it. Hong Hing understood perfectly well that it was much more profitable for him to work in a large corporation, and besides, he could work there developing in his profession. He also understood that his daughter would be satisfied with any choice. The main thing was that he was next to her. At that very moment, he thanked the manager, but said that he had already found something to do for himself. The manager asked in surprise whether other companies were now accepting applications. Hong Hing said that he initially aimed for a corporation, but in the end, he decided to get a doctoral scholarship from the institute, and he planned to get professional training there. The manager looked at the young man with a smile as he wanted to work with him, but still he wished him good luck. Hong Hung thanked the leader for his kind words. After some time, the young people said goodbye on a pleasant note. But after some time, the young man asked Hong Hung in surprise what he was doing in such a place. Hong Hyun said with a smile that the professor he spoke about yesterday in the language he worked in was Choi Uthakom. Supervisor Yan said with a smile that he was in the process of signing a partnership with the company, and they planned to be the first in this industry, and they also wanted to create a real assistant with artificial intelligence. At that very moment, the manager said with a smile that they were destined to work together, because one could not be sure that in a few years he would not become one of them. Hong Hing thanked the leader with a smile for such words. But at that very moment, he mentally imagined himself as one of the best in the corporation. One thought excited him. But he knew that he shouldn't have false hopes, because he knew that he would be disappointed if everything turned out to be a pipe dream. After a while, everyone was looking intently at the young people. Charon looked closely at her father and asked if he was having a hard time. He smiled and said that it was not a bit hard for him, because he enjoyed carrying her in his arms and hugging her while he wandered around the campus with his daughter, attracting unwanted attention. That's why he didn't wear it in a place like that. He didn't feel comfortable with it. And as the weather grew warmer, more and more, students ran out to see his daughter, thinking that it was nothing more than a father's struggle for the safety of his child. He ran away from all eyes with his daughter and hoped that they would not get him in such a place, but she thought that it was still hard for him. He was hurt by the fact that it was becoming more and more difficult for him to carry her in his arms, even though she had grown only a little. At that moment, he suggested that it was time for him to take up sports. Chang-Su ran up to them at the same time and happily greeted the young lady, and at the same time, all of Hong Hung's fast thoughts were scattered by the screams. She stopped him at that very moment and said that she did not want to hug him, because her father said that if she was close to him, then certainly, and to catch the disease was a fool. The young man was shocked and told his friend that he was not a fool at all, because he was also a university student. But at that very moment, his friend told him to think about his behavior. Chang-Su was very angry and did not understand what was wrong at all. He shouted at his friend to introduce him to his daughter properly. Hong Hing told his daughter with a smile that in front of her was a talented student from the best university and that he was simply a genius and wanted to teach her a lot. She asked with admiration if this was true. At that very moment, the young man sighed heavily and told his friend that he had been very rude and that now he would also have to have a child in order to do something similar in the future. At that very moment, they noticed Yoon approaching Jung with her friends. The young lady looked at them with a smile and asked if they hadn't been waiting for them for a long time. Changsu smiled and said that they had just arrived, but at that very moment, the young lady rushed towards the young beauty. Yu Yunjong was a friend of a young man from the student club. Unfortunately, he didn't understand women's clothing, so he knew he would need help shopping for his daughter. At that very moment, Chansu shouted at the young girl to stop hugging the girl and to introduce her friends as it was awkward for them to stand. At that very moment, the young ladies introduced themselves. At the same time, the young lady introduced her friends to her girlfriends. Hong Hung looked at them with a smile and thanked them for their help. Chansu was puzzled because his friend had not presented him in the best light, and he was worried about what impression this would leave on the girls. At that very moment, she introduced the young girl she had told them so much about. She joyfully shouted that she was simply a beauty. A moment later, all the ladies were captivated by the girl's beauty. Changsu looked at everyone present with a puzzled expression, as it was strange for him to feel like he was the odd one out. Hong Hing looked at everyone present with a smile and thanked them for agreeing to come and help him, as his daughter needed to update her wardrobe and he had no idea where to go or what to buy. Yu Yunjong said with a smile that when it comes to his daughter, it is simply impossible to refuse him. She also said that it is her duty as the president of the fan club. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. She said that it was not official yet, but since he was the girl's father, she would tell him everything. At that moment, the young ladies shouted that they were official members of the Charon fan club. He was taken aback and froze in shock on the spot. At that very moment, the young man asked, puzzled if she was really speaking seriously now, and not joking at all. She smiled and said in all seriousness that everything was serious. And then she asked if he knew how many different fan clubs there were in the world. Yu Yunjong said that even the flying spaghetti monster has fans. And yet she didn't understand how his daughter was any worse. At that moment, she asked if he really thought she didn't deserve it. He was taken aback, since this was not what he had meant at all. But the young lady did not let him finish and said that his daughter was beautiful and smart. And besides, she had a wonderful character, and at the same time, there was nothing strange in the fact that people admired her. Hong Hing was puzzled and did not understand at what point he should try to convince them otherwise. They spoke in all seriousness, and he was speechless. At that moment, Hong Hyun looked at the other girls in surprise and asked if they were also members of the fan club. Yu Yunjong said they were the first official members of the club. The young man was puzzled and did not know if this situation was normal. After some time, Chan-su asked the girls if they would have free time after shopping. He suggested that they order chicken and drink beer. The young ladies whispered among themselves, as they did not want anything like that Yu-eun. At this, Jung grabbed the young man and asked him angrily if he could at least have some manners. She screamed that she was ashamed of the fact that she studied with him at the same university. She screamed that they were not interested in him and asked him to stop flirting with them. He was puzzled because he did nothing of the sort. Yu Eun-jung sighed heavily and said that she would introduce him to her other friends if he behaved decently today. He said with a smile that he would do his best. At that very moment, he shouted and suggested that the boys quickly go shopping. She was puzzled because she knew that she shouldn't have invited him, but she also knew that without him, she wouldn't have been able to meet the young beauty. A moment later, she invited them into the beautiful store. Hwang Soo-yeon looked at the beautiful dress with a smile and asked the girl what she thought of it. Kim Tae-yeon saw the beautiful vest at that moment, but she knew that it was simple, yet very elegant. Yu Yoon-jung looked at the girls with a smile and shouted that they didn't need to suffer and that they should take everything to try on. At that moment, the young man looked at them with bewilderment because they had just started and he was already very tired. After some time, a wonderful fashion show began. The young lady tried on a beautiful and elegant dress. She also tried on a beautiful knitted vest, which was not only beautiful, but also comfortable to wear. But in the end, she tried on a very modest and beautiful outfit And at the same time, the young lady was a real star. The young men looked at the girl with admiration, because they knew that she looked beautiful in any clothes. But moments later, the young ladies were arguing about the flowers. They didn't know if there were a lot of them, or if everything was normal. Yoo Eun-jung asked Charon what she liked most of what she tried on. Hong Hung watched them closely, but he was very tired, and already wanted to go home as soon as possible. At the same time, the young ladies were arguing about what would be best to buy for the girl. He was glad that they had finally decided something about her, and he would soon be able to go home. Chang-Soo W immediately suggested that everyone go to another store, as they could find a cooler outfit. At that moment, all the ladies agreed with him, and noticed that he could say sensible things. And at the same time, the father and daughter looked at them with puzzlement as they wanted to go home. Hong Hung looked at his friend with bewilderment, as he couldn't understand how he dared to prolong the nightmare of shopping. He understood that all this was for the sake of being his girlfriend for a little longer. Charon looked at her father with a puzzled expression and asked if they were done for the day. He sighed heavily and said that he hoped so. But after some time, the young lady was already showing off in another store and in another exquisite outfit. Looking at the young model, the girls agreed that it would be better to buy everything they liked. Hong Hung looked at everyone present with a smile and said that he would pay for everything. Hong Hing had no idea how much it would cost in the end, but he was ready to do anything just to finish quickly and go home. At that very moment, he asked the girl with a smile to count the amount for them, but the young lady got ahead of him and asked the girl to take her card. Hong Hyun was taken aback and asked in surprise what she was doing. She smiled and said that, as the president of the fan club, she should be the one paying for the first shopping trip. Hong Hing puzzledly told the young lady that she would spend all her money on it, but he said that he would gladly accept her offer, but he wanted to pay for everything himself. She smiled and said that he didn't need to worry about it, as she had worked tirelessly for many years and could now afford it. At that very moment, the young man said with a smile that in that case he would pay for the dinner, since what the fans really wanted was to have dinner with their favorite. Hong Hyun looked at his daughter with a smile and asked if she wanted to go with his friends to dinner. She smiled and said that she was ready to go to the ends of the earth with him. At that moment, he smiled and said that, in that case, he would buy her something tasty. He had a feeling that he was trapped, but he understood that he had to repay them for their help. Some time later, the young lady was trembling and saying that coming to such a place was a huge mistake. Hong Hing was puzzled and did not understand why such an episode had befallen him. At the same moment, Sharon, in bewilderment, asked his father why his uncle was behaving in such a way. Chang-Soo looked at the girls with a smile and said that they had a drink together today, and that's why they were in a relationship. Everyone was shocked since he actually assumed that such a pickup line would work. Kim Tae-yeon sighed heavily and called out to the young man. At that very moment, she looked at him and asked for forgiveness, saying that his speeches were completely boring. He was shocked, and her words went straight to his heart. He asked in confusion if it was really that bad. Kim Tae-yeon said that even her old man, her father, would not have made such a joke. Hwang Soo-yeon looked at the young man with a smile and said that since their meeting, all she could think about was how clear his skin was. He sheepishly thanked her for the compliment. Yoo Eun-jung looked at her friend with a smile and said that she thought he looked much better now than before. He said that she should stop doing this because sometimes people even talked nonsense about him getting married. Kim Tae-yeon said with a smile that they all said that because he was well-groomed and handsome. At the same time, they looked closely at the young girl, as they now understood who she was so beautiful from. He thanked them, puzzled for such compliments. Chang-Soo looked at his friend with confusion, as he saw that they all rejected him. But as soon as his friend opens his mouth, everyone smiles. Chang-Soo was overshadowed not by clouds, because he was jealous of his friend and wanted to be popular among the ladies. After this day, he seriously thought about his image. Chang-Soo looked at his friend closely and said that he should remember the day they went shopping, and it was precisely that day that everyone disliked him so much. Chang-Soo looked at his friend intently and told him not to avoid answering and to tell him the pure truth. Hong Hung sighed heavily and, looking away from his friend, said that he was a little embarrassed by his clumsiness. At that moment, the young man's expression darkened. Hong Hyun smiled and told his friend not to be upset, because the next time they met, he would tell them that Chang-su simply didn't know how to communicate with girls. Chang-su sighed heavily and said that he had been thinking about the situation for several days, and therefore, he had decided that appearance was still important, and that was why he wanted to start doing sports with him. Hun Hung sharply rejected his friend as he understood that if he trained with him, his daughter would be unattended. But his friend assured him that he could not cope alone because he had no willpower at all. The young man ran away from his friend in a hurry and shouted that they would not do such a thing. He thought that after his refusal, the young man would give up this idea, but he continued to persuade him for the whole month. He brought his friend small gifts with all his heart. Hong Heng was puzzled and asked his friend why he didn't stop, even after several weeks had passed. He shouted to his friend that this was just a waste of time. In response, he looked him intently in the eyes and said that his friend might have already agreed after much persuasion. Hong Heng once again told his friend that he couldn't because of his daughter. At that moment, his friend said that it seemed like he had forgotten about everything. Chang-su, with tears in his eyes, told his friend that he couldn't even eat properly because of his hard work and studies, and he brought him food and everything he needed. The young man was successful and didn't understand why his friend was doing something like this to him. When his friend said things like that, he wanted to repay him for the kindness he had done in kind, but he understood that his daughter would always come first. At that moment, the professor intervened in their conversation and said with a smile that he would be studying the girl's physical abilities and comparing them with her mental development so that they could go to the hall at that time. Hong Heng asked the professor in surprise if he was sure, but the professor said that his friend had always been looking out for him, and he couldn't ignore that fact. The young man thanked the professor with a joyful smile. Hong Hyun looked at his friend and said that he had to promise him one thing. He told his friend that if he started crying even once during training, he would never go to the gym with him again. At that very moment, the young man with a joyful smile told his friend that he should not worry, because for him, the concept of giving up did not exist. So thanks to the professor, they were able to meet at training, but unfortunately, the training was grueling, and he told his friend every time that he was harsh with him. Hong Hung looked at his friend in surprise and said that this exercise was easy for him and he should stop fooling around. At that very moment, he suddenly pounced on him and shouted that it was unfair, and it looked like he had drunk some kind of energy drink since he had so much strength. Hong Hyun asked his friend in bewilderment why he should hide anything when he was training, just like his friend. At that moment, the lady said that everything was correct and her dad was not lying. After a moment, the young man's face darkened because he understood that this was all strange, and he did not understand why he was so tired, unlike his friend. Hong Hung was a little puzzled because he himself had recently taken up sports, but he didn't understand why it was so easy for him. He immediately wondered if he was really in the percentage of sports geniuses, but only the young lady knew that this was not the case, because the reason why he edited sports so easily was precisely her. After he fell asleep, she worked on his health because she wanted him not to get tired, and at the same time, she made him stronger. Charon was very glad that her magic, the restoration, worked. Charon looked closely at his father, as she thought that we should start with the face and then work on losing weight. But during the training, he had already lost quite a lot. However, she knew there were still some imperfections, and now that she had taken care of his facial skin, she could move on to the next step. At that moment, she saw the beautiful idols and noticed their beautiful eyes and beautiful noses. Charon looked at her father with a happy smile because she knew that she could handle something like this. She really wanted to make her father even more handsome. But at that very moment, the young lady was taken aback as she could not believe what she saw. Charon wondered if her magic was so amazing that it was glowing from him. At that very moment, she happily hugged her father, wanting to see how handsome he would be in the morning, but at the same time, she really hoped that he would dream of her. After several weeks of training, the young man looked at his friend with bewilderment, as he did not understand how such things were possible, since they were doing the same thing. He shouted and asked his friend why he had become even more beautiful. At the same time, the young man himself began to understand that he had become even more beautiful. People said that losing weight was better than plastic surgery, and yet the young man had changed dramatically after losing weight, because even in his school years when he was thin, No one praised his appearance like they do now. Changsu shouted at his friend and demanded that he immediately reveal the secret of how something like this happened. He smiled and said that he himself did not know how it all happened. The young men looked at him intently and said that life was unfair because they knew that their friend had always been handsome, but now he was simply draining the beauty away. At that moment, the professor approached them and asked puzzled why they were standing in front of the laboratory and making noise. Hong Hung said with a smile that they were just discussing the secrets of beauty. The professor smiled and said that it was a very interesting topic, but at the same time, he also said that he admired the young man's appearance. Hong Hung thanked the professor with a smile, and he in response asked if the young man would like to become the face of their laboratory. He was taken aback as he did not expect such a thing. The professor shouted with a joyful smile that from now on the young man would represent them everywhere. He was shocked and did not understand why the professor suddenly started talking about this. The professor looked at him intently and asked, "What is activated in the human brain when he sees a beautiful human?" Hong Heng looked at the professor in bewilderment and said that the nucleus accumbens was probably being activated. The professor looked at him intently and asked what would happen if it were activated during a lecture. The young man suggested that everyone would become more interested and have fun just like at some party. At that very moment, the professor smiled joyfully and shouted that everything was correct. And now he had to think about what it would be like to be at a party during a lecture. Hong Hung realized that it sounded absurd and incredibly surprising. At that very moment, the young man seriously wondered what had actually happened to his appearance. At the same time, her young lady looked at her father with joy, because she knew that everything was going according to her plan, because under her guidance, her father was becoming more and more beautiful every day. After some time, the young people measured their heights. Changsu was puzzled and told his friend that they were the same height, but now he had grown taller. The young man asked in bewilderment how this could have happened. They immediately assumed that it was all because of the training. At that very moment, a young lady approached them and asked the young man for his phone number, as she had been watching him for a long time. They were taken aback, as they had not expected anything like this. But at that very moment, he asked for forgiveness and announced that he already had a child. She was surprised as she had not expected anything like this. Hong Hyun looked at the girl with a timid smile and said that this was not an excuse for refusal, and in fact, he was telling the pure truth. His friend asked with a smile if she had heard about Charon since her father was in front of her. At that very moment, she bowed and asked for forgiveness, as she had not expected anything like this at all. He smiled and said that everything was fine and she did not need to worry. After some time, the young man asked his friend in confusion whether he should have surgery. Hong Hung told his friend not to talk nonsense and also said that they needed to finish the reports as soon as possible. Chansu immediately told his friend that this was too much and that he would definitely run away somewhere and he would work on his own. He was puzzled and said that his soul was wounded. But a moment later, a young lady ran up to them and greeted them happily and also told her father that she had missed him very much. Hong Hyun smiled and told his daughter that he missed her too, but at the same time asked if she had done well with her assignments. She said that she had done well with everything and also asked if they could go for a walk on the weekend. Hong Heng looked at the young lady intently and asked what he should do since his friend had promised to help him with the reports. But now he was saying that he would run away. At that very moment, she approached her uncle and asked if he was really going to run away. He sighed heavily and said that he didn't even know, because he was very angry with her father. She looked at him intently and informed him that she had been looking forward to this weekend, and if they didn't make the report, she wouldn't be able to go for a walk with her father. He sighed heavily and said that they should promise to have dinner together as planned. Hong Hyun looked at his friend mockingly as he assumed that he would not be able to resist the charms of his daughter. Hong Hing looked at his friend intently and said with a smile that they needed to concentrate and finish quickly. After some time, having carefully studied the documents, he reported that this report would take much longer than he had expected. Chang-Su looked at his friend intently and said with a grin that in his opinion there was nothing to do there, and they would quickly get it done. Chang-Su smiled and said to the other that they could make a bet if he didn't believe it, and whoever finished last would pay for the dinner. At that very moment, the young man accepted his friend's bet. Sharon looked at her father with a happy smile and wished him luck, as she knew he could handle it. He smiled and thanked her. Hugging her father, she said that he should become smarter. At that very moment, he thanked his daughter, because thanks to her words, he gained strength. At that very moment, the young man was taken aback, as he had the feeling that he had already lost, even though they hadn't even started yet. He understood that he could lose to his friend in anything, but certainly not in intellect. After some time, they looked closely at the young man and asked how much work he still had left since they were already hungry. Jiangsu was puzzled and told his friend that he had cheated somewhere. He did not understand how his friend had managed to complete the task so quickly. Hong Heng sighed heavily and told his friend that he was simply solving everything, and at the same time, he asked his friend to stop looking for tricks and finish quickly since his daughter was hungry. After a while, he told his comrades that he was finished, but at that moment, he realized that he shouldn't have argued with his friend. Hong Heng smiled and told his friend that he would just pay for everything, and they could pretend that nothing had happened. At that moment, the young man beamed with joy, while Hong Heng asked his friend to be a little more modest. At the same time, Sharon looked intently at her father and called him. She asked if they could have dinner at home that night, as she wanted him to cook something for her. Hong Hyun sighed heavily and said that they really had only been eating store-bought food lately. He didn't know what to do in this situation, since they had already promised Chang-soon to have dinner together. At that very moment, he smiled and asked his daughter if she wanted him to cook her something for the weekend. She beamed and asked if he promised her him. Hong Heng promised his daughter with a smile that he would cook a dash, and Sharon in turn joyfully shouted that they should hurry up because they were very hungry. His daughter enjoyed a wonderful dinner and received what was promised. He was surprised and at the same time happy since the hostess was generous and always gave them free refills. At the same time, they looked with joyful smiles at the little girl who was eating very cutely. Hong Hing didn't even realize that the restaurant owner was bringing them free food only because his daughter ate so well. On the weekend morning, the young lady woke up her father with a smile, as she really wanted him to cook her something delicious. Sharon looked at her father with a smile and said that if he didn't get up, she would paint his face. He was taken aback as he didn't expect such a thing. But at that very moment, he stretched out his hand and pulled the girl towards him. Hong Hyun said with a smile that his embrace would not allow her to do such a thing, and at the same time, he would be able to sleep for a few more minutes. The young lady in turn was shocked and screamed. She wanted him to stop fooling around and get up quickly, as he promised to cook her something delicious. After a few minutes, the young man finally overcame himself, and with a smile told his daughter that he was already getting up. After a few minutes, he was already reviewing all his supplies. But at that moment, he was taken aback, for he knew that the cabinet was higher, and he supposed that he had grown a little. But he was puzzled, for he knew that he had stopped growing many years ago. After some time, he told his daughter with a smile that he had already prepared everything. The young lady in turn happily ate his wonderful creation. At that moment, she happily thanked him for keeping his promise. She said that today would be the best day ever. Hong Hyun looked at the rain with a gentle smile, as he was glad that she was enjoying everything. So he suggested that she have a good time this weekend. That same day, they visited an amusement park. But the young man saw that all eyes were directed at them. They saw that he was beautiful, but nevertheless they wondered if the girl was really his daughter. He saw that they stood out from the crowd. Sharon was very happy, because she realized that her father had become even more handsome. She was happy about this, because she realized that her massage really had an effect on him. Of course she wanted to tell everyone, including him, that it was her magic. But she understood that it was not time yet, and she needed to wait a little. At that very moment, he looked closely at his daughter and asked if she wanted to ride some kind of attraction. She smiled and said that there was one that she would really like to ride. At that very moment, she pulled her father and said that she would now show him everything. He was surprised as he did not expect such a thing. Sharon showed her father this attraction with a smile and said that they had never been able to ride it before, but now that she had grown taller, they had to do something similar. Hong Hung asked in confusion if she really wanted to ride it so much. In turn, the young man really hoped that they would remain alive after this attraction. He understood that he could not chicken out in front of his daughter, but he was still very worried. At that very moment, he shouted that she was very brave, just like him, and therefore they should go on this attraction, Charon. At that very moment, she was delighted and told her father that he was the best. After some time, they were riding the ride. But while the young lady was having fun, her father was very nervous. He was puzzled because he felt sick, but he saw that his daughter was having fun. At that very moment, she showed him a small brochure and said that she wanted to ride on all of them. He was shocked and did not understand why they advertised such dangerous rides to children. Charon looked at her father and asked if he was really scared. He was taken aback because he knew that he could not admit something like that to her, and with a timid smile said that it was not so and they should hurry. She told her father with a smile that he was very brave, but in reality he felt completely different feelings. He understood that his life was in danger as the rides were very lively and fast, but at the same time he hoped that someone would save him. Hong Hung was confused and screaming and begging for help inside, while his daughter was screaming happily because she was having a lot of fun. After a while, he sighed heavily and sat down quietly, but at the same time he really wanted to go home. At that very moment, his daughter said that they had ridden all the rides. She smiled and told her father that next year they should go on the rides that she was not allowed on this year, because in a year Tonak will grow a lot, and then they will definitely be able to ride. He smiled at the task, but also agreed with her. At that very moment, the girl approached them and asked the young man if this was really his daughter. He looked at her in bewilderment and said that everything was correct, but asked why she asked for such information. She smiled and said that she was a writer for the show, and she thought they would be great as TV stars. He looked at her in surprise and said that they were far from being actors, so he did not understand how they could be of use to them. She said that the director wanted to add naturalness. Nothing complicated was required of them. They just had to ride the attraction with their daughter. Hong Hyun looked at his daughter with a smile and asked her what she thought about it. But he didn't think it would be funny. But he did inform his daughter that they might be shown on TV. At that very moment, she happily said that she would like to be shown on TV, just like idols. She happily said that she would like to participate in such an event. At the same time, the young people were closely watching everyone, the extras. Hong Hyun hardly watched TV, so he had no idea what they were all talking about, but he immediately guessed that this series must be very popular. Sharon looked at her father with a smile and said that the aunt in front of them was incredibly beautiful. He smiled and said that it was true because she was the main character. At that very moment, he was taken aback because he realized that they would definitely be shown on TV since they were behind her. And at that very thought, he began to get nervous. At the same moment, the director shouted to the young people to smile broadly. Hong Hung looked at his daughter with a smile and asked if he looked natural. She happily shouted that he was simply wonderful. At that very moment, the director gave the signal and began filming them. The man looked closely at everyone present, as he had done better than he had expected. He was worried because he had to film an emotional scene in a public place, but in his opinion, the main character handled it brilliantly. He also looked closely at the extras. He was surprised and at the same time puzzled because he saw that they looked simply gorgeous and very natural. At the same moment, he wondered whether he should use this scene as an advertisement. He saw that the young man was very handsome and could be mistaken for one of the main characters. He dared to say it, but the little girl was the best actress of all the children on the set. At that very moment, the director thought that this was the most perfect shot of all the footage he had shot. At that very moment, he assumed that he would have the best scene of the year in his pocket and that he would receive an award for it. At that very moment, the young man was taken aback and told the director that the main character was not in the frame at all. The man was taken aback as he realized that he had made a stupid mistake and would have to reshoot all the material. The young man was puzzled as they were planning to finish early since the father and daughter occupied all the director's thoughts. The filming dragged on. At the same time, the fan group joyfully shouted and supported the young actress. Hong Heng looked at his daughter with a smile and wondered if she had had a good time. She smiled and said that she had had a lot of fun. At that very moment, the young ladies looked at the girl with joy because they knew that she was in the frame with their favorite actress. They said that she was very cute and looked like she would soon become a new star. Hong Hyun looked at his daughter with a smile because he knew that she always attracted a lot of attention. He felt that his daughter really looked like some kind of celebrity. At that very moment, the scriptwriter ran up to them and asked them to stay longer. Hong Hyun asked with bewilderment if something had happened and they needed to stay longer. But she said that it was not so, because she just wanted to give them the money for filming. Hong Hyun was surprised because he did not expect anything like this, so he did not know whether he should accept the money. She said with a smile that of course he should accept it too, because they took up their time. At that very moment, she happily said that they should definitely watch the next episode, as they should see how great they looked on camera. Hong Hyun-S looked at his daughter with a smile and said that she earned her first salary. Sharon S. happily shouted that she earned her first money. Hong Heng smiled and asked his daughter what she wanted to spend the money on. He wanted to know if she wanted to buy something tasty or a book. At that moment, the young lady also began to think, and a moment later, she said that she wanted to put them into her bank account or buy shares. He was taken aback and looked at his daughter with bewilderment, since he had not expected anything like this at all. Hong Heng looked at his daughter intently and asked her in a puzzled tone if she understood what she had just said. Sharon sighed heavily and asked her father if he really thought she was stupid. She said that a share is a unit that constitutes capital in a joint stock company. He looked at her with admiration because he realized that she was a genius, and at her early age she was already in high school, but he still knew that investing money in stocks was too risky. Hong Heng knew very well that even the genius Newton had gone bankrupt in this way, and he was very worried that she would go broke and fall into depression. She smiled and told her father that he shouldn't worry, because they could buy the most stable stocks and then she could make a profit. He was puzzled and didn't understand why she was so confident of making a profit. Hong Heng sighed because he realized that he was right when he was told that he would soon face a problem. But he knew that now was a great opportunity to teach her a lesson. At that very moment, he said with a smile that he agreed and would open a brokerage account for her, and she could invest this money and the money she had been given for the new year in stocks. At that very moment, the young lady beamed with happiness and told her father that she loved him very much. But at that very moment, he said that if she lost her money, the account would have to be closed. She smiled and said that she promised they would do just that. As they had agreed, he opened a brokerage account for his daughter, but then he asked her if she remembered her promise, because she had said that if she lost all the money, they would no longer buy shares. She smiled and said that she promised him to do just that. But at that very moment, she was puzzled, looked at him and said that he seemed to be very sure that she would lose the money. She did not understand why he doubted her. He was taken aback and said that she had misunderstood him, and he of course believed in her. Charon said with a satisfied smile that he was doing the right thing and that he didn't need to worry, and it would be better if he supported her, because she really wanted to earn a lot of money to give it to him. He smiled and asked why he needed her money, but he said that they could buy something tasty with the money or go out and have some fun. She smiled and said that she agreed with him, and once a month they could spend money on entertainment. He sighed heavily as he realized that it was his own fault because he had spoiled her calling her very smart, but he understood that she could lose all the money, and this would be a good lesson for her. Some time later, the day came when he had to submit his dissertation. He presented the documents to the professor, and he said that they would begin reading immediately while the young man was very nervous. Hong Heng made many revisions from yesterday until the morning, but at the same time, he hoped that the dissertation would be to the professor's liking, although he understood that we should not calculate much since the professor was famous for his strictness. He knew his dissertation had many flaws and was probably very bad. He knew he needed to give up and look for a job, but at that very moment, he heard praise from the professor. Hong Heng was taken aback and asked in surprise if his dissertation was really that good. The professor looked at him in surprise and asked with a smile if he really hadn't understood yet, since they had been working together for several months already. And when he said it was not bad, it meant not bad and nothing more. At that very moment, the young man thanked the professor. He simply couldn't believe it and wondered if the professor really liked his work. He was perplexed, and it seemed to him that everything had been going swimmingly in the last few days. His dissertation was good. The presentation had also gone off without a hitch, and he had even taken up sports. He hoped he hadn't squandered all his luck, but the more he thought about it, the more scared he became. The doubts that had already been bothering him reached their peak when he went for a medical examination. He was taken aback when he heard that he had grown, as he knew that he had stopped growing back in middle school. The doctor sighed heavily and said that sometimes men continue to grow into later life. He was puzzled, but he knew that if she said that, it meant he had been growing little by little all this time. But he was still puzzled by the fact that in middle school he had only grown a few millimeters, and recently he had grown 6 centimeters. He was surprised because after many years, he had grown up, lost weight, and become more handsome, and therefore wondered what incredible changes were happening in his life. No matter how much he thought about it, he could not find a logical explanation, but at that very moment, he realized that he had to find out what was really happening to him. Hong Hung, in turn, was very puzzled as he did not know where to begin. After the medical examination, he told his friends everything, and they shouted that they had told him earlier that he had grown up, and apparently, in just a few days. Hong Hu couldn't understand how something like this could not happen. He didn't grow for a long time, and after a few days, he grew up, and at the same time, his vision improved, and he couldn't explain how something like this could happen. They looked closely at their friend, because they understood that vision was truly amazing, but they also knew that even cancer patients could miraculously recover, because the human body is one big mystery. At that moment, the young man suggested asking the professor about everything, since they knew that he understood such things better. Hong Hing sighed heavily and said that he had already asked him, and the professor said that there were worse problems in the world. In the end, he did not give a clear answer. At that very moment, the young people advised him to undergo additional examination, since it was possible that he was still a rose. But this examination was not cheap. Hong Hing sighed heavily and assumed that he had indeed been worrying about everything for nothing, since the changes had been for the better, meaning he just needed to think positively. At that moment, he looked at his comrades with a joyful smile and thanked them for listening to him. But he also informed them that it was time for him to leave, as his daughter was already waiting. At that very moment, the young people stopped him and said that today would be the debut of his acting career, and he was very popular in the series. The young man was puzzled. He did not understand what kind of debut they were talking about, since he was just an extra, but they didn't want to listen to him, because they knew that he was filming with a beautiful and charming actress. He was shocked because he understood that they were just fools. But now he regretted that he told them everything. As he was leaving, he said that he needed to hurry to her daughter, and that they could watch the episode themselves. But the young people shouted that they absolutely had to see it together, because they couldn't miss such a chance. They shouted happily and asked him to join them. Hong Hyun was puzzled because he knew they were very stubborn. At that moment, he sighed heavily and agreed to watch the episode together. At the same time, the young people were talking to each other, because for this reason, they even rewatched the entire series. Hong Hyun was overjoyed and understood that they would constantly tease him because of the series. After some time, they all gathered at Hong Hyun's house, and the young lady happily shouted that the commercial was over and the main series would soon begin. Sharon shouted, with a satisfied smile, that they would finally see themselves on TV. She also told her father that she was very interested in how they looked together. Hong Hing had never felt this way before, but now he was a little worried. He assumed that they would only be shown for a few seconds. After all, they were just extras. At that moment, the young man sighed heavily and told his friend that he was very worried. Hong Hung asked him in bewilderment what he was talking about. He told his friend that he heard that today's episode would be very sad, and that the main character would probably give it her all and open up her soul in the most touching scene, but he would have to keep an eye out for a squid-like person. At that very moment, the young man received what he deserved from his friend Hong Hung, looked at his friend with a smile, and said that he should thank him for the fact that his daughter was here. Otherwise, he would have dealt with him more harshly. After some time, they noticed that the series had started. Everyone was watching the episode intently, as they couldn't wait for the park scene. 40 minutes later, the young people watched the episode with indignation. They assumed that it would soon end, and they would never see themselves again. Hong Hing, perplexed, told his daughter that this was all strange, because they said that this episode would come out this week, but it was already the very end of the episode. At that moment, the young lady assumed that the scene was expressed. She was very upset because she tried very hard. Hong Hing looked intently at his daughter because he was afraid that she would be very upset. He prayed with tears in his eyes because he wanted them to be shown at least for a few seconds. After a moment, he noticed that they had not been cut out after all, and a few seconds later, they clearly saw themselves on the screen. At the same time, the young lady was happy as she was shown in close up on TV. At that very moment, the young man called his friends. Hong Hyun looked at the screen with bewilderment because he did not understand why they made a close-up of them. It seemed to everyone that they were not extras but secondary characters. They were surprised because they were shown in the final scene, but they understood that they deserved worldwide popularity because the series was very popular. Hong Hyun looked at his friends with a smile but didn't answer. He understood that they were just extras, but now he felt awkward. At that very moment, the young man told his friend that they were trending. Hong Hing was taken aback, as he did not understand how this happened. Chang-su said with a smile that all the attention was focused on the young lady, and her father just happened to be in the frame. But a moment later, the young man received it again. At that moment, the young people looked intently at their friends, as they could watch forever as the young people fought. Hong Hing said with a smile that his daughter was very cute and beautiful, but not everyone could become popular. Hong Hing also said that he did not mind. Even if his daughter liked this activity, he would not object. At the same time, he asked his daughter if she wanted to be shown on TV often. She looked at her father and asked if he would be there for her. He sighed heavily and said that he could not be there for her. Charon immediately firmly refused and said that she did not want to film without him. The young people looked at her in surprise and said that she was a brilliant girl and should become a student and work for the good of humanity. Chang-su smiled and told his friend that he had recently lost weight and looked better. The young man became embarrassed and asked his friend to stop exaggerating. Chang-su told his friend that his daughter was cute and could become a celebrity, but her father was nothing more than her immediate manager. The father and daughter were very angry at their friend for such words, and he paid a heavy price for saying such words. Filming a crowd scene, which turned out to be just a one-off, took an unexpected turn and surprised the young man because he did not expect anything like this. The internet is a place where things are always happening and people relying on anonymity to stalk each other. And now young people have become an internet meme. But at the same time, they have become volunteers and started helping people who have faced online bullying. He was surprised and at the same time happy that their popularity continued to grow, with his daughter delighting everyone who saw her. But he was still concerned as her photo was circulating on the internet. Hong Hung sighed heavily as he knew that they would hang around in the trends for another few days, and that would be it. They would soon forget about it. He understood that he shouldn't worry, and it would be better to start preparing for the next lecture. That same day, he gave a lecture to the students with a joyful smile, and after it was over, he said with a smile that they could ask him questions since he was already prepared to answer. At that very moment, the young man was taken aback as he saw that everyone was actively raising their hands as they wanted to ask him questions. He smiled and said that he had given quite a lot of lectures, and for the first time, he had encountered such a huge number of questions. At that very moment, he chose a person and asked what exactly interested him. She looked at him intently and said that she was not sure if she could ask such a thing. Hong Hyun smiled and said that she did not need to worry and could ask her question. At that very moment, she smiled and asked if he had been present at that meme from the series. The young man was taken aback, as he had not expected such a question at all. Hong Hung looked at the young girl with a puzzled expression and asked her what she meant. At that moment, everyone realized that she was right, but they also noticed that he was even more handsome in real life. Hong Hyun sighed heavily and apologized, and also told everyone that he would only answer questions on the topic, but they still bombarded him with questions because they wanted to know if he was really the girl's father, and if it was true that they starred in a TV series together. They were very eager to take a photo with him, but they also bombarded him with additional questions on personal topics. Hong Hyun was puzzled to wonder if he should just tell them not to waste their time. At that very moment, he looked intently at everyone present and asked for a minute of their attention. Hong Hyun said with a smile that they were all right, and that he and his daughter had recently appeared as extras in a TV series. He also said that this was more than enough to satisfy their curiosity, and now they could continue. But at that very moment, everyone started making noise because they were surprised that it really was him. But they also saw that he was very handsome, and therefore wanted to take a photo with him. Hong Hung sighed heavily and looked at everyone present with a smile as he realized that he should have kept his mouth shut. Contrary to his expectations, his meme was only gaining momentum. That same day, the young man told his friend with a smile that he was now an internet star. Hong Hing was shocked and did not expect to see anything like this. He did not expect that the photo of his lecture would spread all over the internet and he would become world famous. Hong Hyun, in turn, did not understand at all why people did something like this. He did not understand who even cared about news that was not about celebrities. His friend, surprised, told him to look at the photo since it had collected a lot of views and likes. At that very moment, they saw that the young man's number of subscribers had increased significantly. But at that very moment, girls also noticed them. They approached the young people with smiles, and Dad asked Hong Hyun to leave them an autograph as a keepsake, and also said with admiration that he was truly very handsome. Hong Hung was shocked by this, and knew that this situation was simply absurd, but he saw that the young girl was very happy about this. At that very moment, he did not forget to take a photo with a fan, but in turn, he wondered if he had really been sleeping. He understood perfectly well that such a thing simply could not happen, but his friend declared with a smile that he was still very popular. Hong Hyun looked at his friend with a puzzled expression and asked if he found it strange. He didn't understand why he had become popular, since he had expected something similar to happen to his daughter, Chang. Sue smiled and told his friend that he was probably just under the spell of popularity. Hong Heng sighed heavily and told his friend not to say such nonsense. His friend said with a smile that it was even for the best. Hong Heng was immediately taken aback as he saw that it was his beloved who was writing to him. After reading the message from his beloved, he was taken aback, and his face turned pale as he learned that in a few days it would be his daughter's birthday. After some time, he told his friend about his worries. Hong Hyun was very worried because he was not a person who liked to celebrate holidays, and at the same time, he was so busy that he forgot about the holiday. Chang-soo said that now he knows about the holiday. He also said that his saddest memory from school was how his parents forgot about his birthday. Hong Heng sighed heavily and said that he didn't even remember ever celebrating his birthday. His friend said that usually in elementary school, they would throw whole cells of drinks on this occasion, so he said that his friend would upset his daughter, and at the same time, he should prepare a good celebration. Hong Heng, after consulting with his friend, decided to throw a party or something like it. Hong Heng was a little worried, because he knew that his daughter did not go to kindergarten and had no friends. Chang-soo smiled and told his friend that since he had become popular, he could simply ask for advice online. Hong Heng looked at his friend closely and said that it seemed like he hadn't heard from him for a long time. Hong Hyun was very upset because he realized that he had sold his face. His friend said that he should just make a party that his daughter would like, so he should just ask what she wants. Hong Hung sighed heavily and told his friend that his daughter was very smart and she would immediately understand why he needed such information. Chang-soo said with a smile that they could walk around the mall and see what would interest her. On the advice of his friend, he decided to go to the mall with his daughter. He asked his daughter if she wanted to go shopping with him. She was surprised that he suddenly suggested something like that to her. He smiled and said that he would like to buy her new clothes, but she assured that she already had a lot of clothes. He said that he needed to dress up. Sharon stated that he had recently ordered clothes. At that very moment, he timidly asked if she would like to just go for a walk. Sharon shouted that she really wanted to go for a walk with him. Hong Heng said that they hadn't gone out or eaten anything delicious for a long time. At that moment, she told her father that if that was the case, they could buy her a birthday present. He smiled and agreed with her, but at that very moment he was taken aback because looking at his daughter, he realized that she had immediately guessed everything. At that very moment, the young lady screamed with joy because she was very happy. After some time, the young lady was as happy as she was, having fun spending time with her father. But she didn't know what to buy her for her birthday, and she wondered whether she should buy a toy or a book. He looked at the rain with bewilderment as he realized that there would be no surprise. Hong Yoon-seo, with tears in his eyes, wondered why he thought he could handle something like this when he couldn't even persuade her to go to the mall. Hong Hyun knew he was always ruining things like this, but he knew it was his own fault because he should have thought it all out in advance and done it beautifully. At that very moment, she asked her father what he thought Aunt Yeji's son would like. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she was talking about the doctor from their laboratories. She smiled and said that everything was correct since the boy's birthday was coming soon, and they needed to buy him a present. At the same moment, she asked what he didn't understand. Hong Hyun was taken aback because he realized she was talking about a friend, but he still asked how she knew it was his birthday. Charon said with a smile that everyone in the laboratory was very good friends with her. He knew that for them, Charon's existence was much more important than his existence. But in any case, he was glad that she didn't suspect anything, and now he realized that he could still give her a surprise. After some time, they visited a shopping mall, but the young man was taken aback when he saw a little boy who was bursting into tears and screaming at the whole mall because he wanted to get a toy as a gift. His mother shouted that she had bought him exactly the same toy last time, but he shouted back that it was a new collection, and at the same time, he declared that she did not understand anything. Hong Heng looked at this situation closely, as he knew that this was a common situation for parents who came to this shopping mall with a child. He understood that there was nothing wrong with this, since it was typical for children to behave this way. But at that very moment, he looked at his daughter with bewilderment and wondered if she really hadn't been interested in anything, while the young lady was carefully examining each toy, because she didn't know what her friend would like. At that very moment, she asked her father if he liked the toy from the latest series. Charon looked at her father intently as she stated that she wanted to buy a gift for her friend, but she had no money at all and didn't know what to do in this situation. Hong Hyun looked at his daughter with a smile and said that she didn't need to worry, as he would buy her a toy. He also asked if she wanted to buy something for herself, as there were a lot of toys in the mall. She smiled and said that she didn't want anything, but if she wanted something, she would definitely tell him about it. He was puzzled since he spoke to her, as if she were a child, and she behaved like an adult. He wished that just once she would act like a child and throw a tantrum. But now he was at a dead end since he had no idea what to give her for the holiday. He thought that, at her age, there was nothing wrong with being reasonable, but he knew that such moments did not play into his hands. Charon looked closely at her father and asked if he really wouldn't buy anything for himself since they had come to the shopping center so that he could buy something for himself. At that moment, he was taken aback and said with a smile that everything was correct. But looking at her father, she noticed that this was all very strange. He froze for a moment as he assumed she would soon figure him out. She smiled and asked if he couldn't think about shopping because he was distracted by her beauty. He sighed with relief and said that it was exactly like that, and because of her beauty, he didn't see anything around him. But at that very moment, he felt relieved that she had not caught him. Charon threw herself into his arms and said that since he did not need anything, they could go home. He was puzzled because they were heading home, but he didn't know anything. He realized that if we counted today, then there were only a few days left until her birthday. At that very moment, the young lady shouted to her father that she wanted to go to the store. Hong Hyun looked at her with bewilderment as she wanted to go to the grocery store. But at the same moment, he remembered that she liked his dishes the most. She rushed towards the vegetables with a smile as they reminded her of his rice balls, although she noted that simply fried vegetables were also delicious. Charon looked at her father with a smile and said that she wanted him to cook something delicious for her. She asked if they could buy vegetables and make rice balls again. Hong Hyun said with a smile that she could choose whatever she liked. At that very moment, the young man beamed with happiness as he realized that he could surprise her, so with the help of his daughter, he came up with a good gift for her. After some time, he scrolled through the entire internet in search of a wonderful and delicious dish. He noticed that many things could be made from the products that she liked, and he also knew that he should make her favorite rice balls. Hong Hung wanted to find her more recipes in a few days and prepare delicious dishes. Because he has been cooking a lot lately, he has become better at it. The next day, he prepared a delicious dish, and all his friends looked at the masterpiece with admiration. Chang-su said with a smile that the dish probably just looked pretty and didn't taste very good. Hong Hyun was puzzled by his friend's comment and immediately said that the dish looked delicious and they should try it quickly. At that very moment, they wished each other bon appetit. He looked intently at his friends, who were eating his dish with great pleasure. They were shocked and simply speechless, as they had never tasted anything more delicious. Chansu looked at his friend with admiration and said that he was not joking and that the dish was very tasty, and he was sure that his daughter would like her father's surprise. Hong Hyun-s looked at his comrades with a satisfied smile, as he was glad that they liked everything, and he knew that tomorrow everything would go perfectly, and he would give a wonderful gift to his daughter. He knew that now the main obstacle was organizing a surprise, since his daughter woke up early. He realized that he had to wake up first, and at the same time, he was afraid that because of the holiday, she could wake him up even earlier. At that very moment, he set the alarm clock and looked at his daughter with a tender smile, as he already knew how he would begin to prepare a surprise for her. He wished her sweet dreams with a gentle smile, as he intended to make this day the best day of her life. The next day, the young man woke up and noticed that it was already early morning. He was surprised, because he felt the warm rays of the morning sun and a ringing sound came from the kitchen. Then he realized that someone was cooking in the kitchen. A moment later, he woke up and realized that something had gone wrong. At that moment, he looked at his watch and was taken aback, as he realized that he had overslept, but still wondered why he had gotten up late, as he had set an alarm for himself. At that moment, he realized that he had failed with the surprise. But when he entered the kitchen, he was taken aback. He looked in surprise at his daughter, who was standing in the kitchen and preparing food. She greeted him with a smile. Hong Heng looked tremblingly at his daughter and asked what she was doing. She smiled and asked if he was surprised. At that moment, he could not stand it any longer, and shouted that no matter how different she was from ordinary children, she was only 7 years old. He shouted and asked if she understood how dangerous knives and fire were. He shouted and said that she shouldn't play with such things. At the same moment, she got upset and said that she hadn't played at all. He was taken aback and asked in surprise what she was doing then. But at that very moment, the young man looked with bewilderment at the beautiful dishes that were behind his daughter. He was surprised and asked what he saw, and also who had prepared the wonderful dishes. At that very moment, the young people left the room and with smiles told their friend not to shout at the girl, as it was not easy for them to hide. Hong Heng was taken aback and asked in surprise if this was really a dream. He did not understand what they were doing in his toilet. The lovely ladies said that he should first change his clothes, since they had seen everything perfectly well. He was taken aback and quickly closed his body, but in the same world, the young lady said with a smile that she was joking, and he should already come to his senses. She looked intently at the hero of the occasion and said that they should listen to her. Charon looked at her father intently and said that today was her birthday. She said with a smile that this is the reason she prepared everything, because thanks to her mom and dad, she was born, so she wanted to make a gift for him. He looked at her in surprise and said that it was her birthday, and therefore he did not understand why she should thank him. She said with a smile that she was grateful to him for being born. Hong Hyun so looked at his daughter with tears in his eyes, as he had not expected anything like this at all. It was unexpected for him, because he received a gift for no reason, but now he understood what it meant to reap the fruits of his labor. At that very moment, the young lady said that his daughter had come to her a week ago and asked to spend her birthday with her. And then she said that she wanted to cook something, but she didn't know how. Hong Heng looked at his friend in surprise and asked if she had really prepared everything herself. She said with a smile that she had not done it, and that his daughter had done everything with her own hands. She said that the girl practiced in the lab every day while he was away, and the professor paid for the food. He was shocked because everyone knew except him. She said that the whole lab knew about it, and they had to endure to hide this fact. Hong Heng looked closely at his friends and asked if they also knew and hid the truth from him all this time. They smiled and said that they knew about everything, but hid the truth from him. The lady looked at her friend with a smile and said that what they were most afraid of was that he would wake up early, but still he slept like a log. Hong Heng was puzzled and ashamed of his behavior, but his friends assured him that thanks to him, their plan had succeeded, and they also said that they had bought a cake, and they could eat together. The girl looked at her friends with a smile and said that thanks to them, She felt energized and in a good mood this morning. They also told him that the professor said that he could skip work today and spend the day with his daughter. A moment later, the young people announced with a smile that they would not disturb them and that they could spend the day together. They also did not forget to congratulate the girl on her birthday. She happily said goodbye to them and thanked them for their help. At that moment, she looked intently at her father and said that they should start eating quickly before it got cold. But a moment later, Charon looked at her father with confusion, as she did not understand why he did not eat. She asked if the food really looked tasteless. But when she looked closer, she saw that her father was looking at the food with tears in his eyes. She was shocked and did not understand why he was crying. He sighed heavily and said that he had not celebrated a birthday for a long time, but at the same time, he was very happy about this celebration and wanted to eat with pleasure. Charon looked at him with a satisfied smile and asked him not to cry. She said that from now on she would cook for his birthday. He looked at her with a tender smile and thanked her. But at that very moment, he realized that he was lucky to have such a daughter. Professor Bayeknahi looked at the young man with a smile and said that the pineapple was heard that his daughter had prepared a gift for him. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she knew about such a thing. He was puzzled that rumors had spread everywhere. She said with a smile that people were interested in everything about his daughter because she was their local star. Hong Hing sighed heavily and asked the professor what had brought her to him because he understood that she had come to him and clearly not for such a conversation. She smiled and asked if he remembered that she had promised to find out about the school. At that moment, she said that the Korean National University was engaged in the education of gifted elementary school children. Hong Heng thanked the professor, but said that his daughter was currently a research subject in the professor's laboratory, and he thought that she would not leave this place while he was working. And at that very moment, she said that she knew about it, and they had already discussed everything with their professor. He understood that no matter how special his daughter was, she was still his child. He did not understand why, but they discussed her future without his consent. Hong Hing looked at her menacingly and asked if she really meant to say that they had decided without his knowledge where it would be better to send his daughter. She was taken aback and said that he should understand her correctly because she had no intention of sending his daughter to university without his consent. She said the professor had told her that the girl's brain was the future of Korea and that the regular curriculum was meaningless to her. She said that the girl was supposed to go to high school next year, but in the current situation, the Korean National University was the best option for her. He sighed heavily and said that in that case, she would be better off going there. At the same moment, she said that it wouldn't be particularly useful for her either, but it was worth a try. He looked at her with bewilderment, as he did not understand what they were talking about, but he understood that they would still have to separate. He understood that he couldn't send his daughter away suddenly. At that very moment, the professor informed the young man that she knew about the youth institutions at their school. She smiled and said that he needed to think about it very carefully, since the future of Korea was in his hands. She didn't know if it was really worth sending the girl to a national university. Hong Heng asked if their school accepted more than just middle and high school students. She said that was true, but the school was under her jurisdiction. She also reported that she discussed this problem with the president. She said that she asked him to accept the girl because she was special, and at that moment, the young man became successful because he did not expect anything like that. He asked in surprise if she had really asked the school president for something like that. She looked at him in bewilderment and asked why he was so surprised, since his daughter had proven that she was worthy of it. She smiled and said that she had finally gotten permission because she needed to see him to discuss her fall entrance exams. Hong Heng was taken aback because he knew that they didn't have them in elementary school. She sighed heavily and said that there was a case at another school where a student came in November and graduated the following year, and so she thought his daughter could do the same. The professor also told the young man that his daughter should receive the title because it would help her in the future. She said that if he agreed and wanted to take advantage of the exceptional situation, then they could resolve the issue. He understood that titles helped attract attention, and he also understood that his daughter would be the most gifted child and the youngest student. He had already imagined how his daughter, the youngest and most talented student at a Korean university, would publish her dissertation. He knew that in that case, a large number of people would focus on her dissertation. Hong Hing looked at the professor with a smile and said that he was very glad that they had discussed it. And he agreed with it, and he also thanked her for her efforts. She said with a smile that, of course, his child is a precious child for everyone. And she was so precious that even Professor Choi. Everything is legal as long as she studies with them. He smiled and said that he is her father, but sometimes he wondered if he did the right thing, interfering with her future. She smiled and said that he shouldn't say such words because he is the only parent she trusts and depends on. She said that in the future, the girl will always accept and listen to him, and she will also take his opinion into account in different situations. So she asked him not to regret his decisions as a father. Hong Hing looked at the woman with a smile and said that everything was correct, and also thanked her for such support. After some time, he finally came to the professor and said that Sharon was his daughter, and they had to discuss all the nuances about her future directly with him. The professor sighed heavily and sincerely asked for forgiveness. He said that it should have been his first priority to talk to him, but at the same time, he said that he would try to make sure that something like this did not happen again. The young man said he was a little upset when he heard that. The professor smiled and apologized again for not telling him everything. He also asked the young man if he really wanted to hear such words. Hong Hung sighed heavily and said that everything was correct. The professor said that it was a matter of competition. As a result of the school's inattention, the results became publicly known, and they would not have had such a problem if not for a simple leak of information. But the number of schools wanting to accept his daughter increased several times. He was taken aback and said that if his daughter did not want to, then nothing would work out for them. The professor told the young man that he was right, and that was why many people wanted to see them, and this could become a problem for them. The professor said in all seriousness that he did not want to lose the young lady at all, so he discussed the situation with his superiors, and it took them several days. Hong Hung was very surprised when he heard something like this. The professor smiled and said that they had not been able to talk because he was not at work yesterday. After a few minutes of dialogue, the young man thanked his mentor, but the professor told the young man with a smile that he was still grateful to him for his understanding. At that very moment, the professor said that he was waiting for him at his workplace, but his daughter would stay with them only if he was with them. Hong Hing looked at the professor with a puzzled expression and asked if he knew how to get bonuses when buying one item in grocery stores. At that very moment, the professor told him with a smile the answer to the question. Hong Hing sighed heavily and said that it seemed like he and his daughter were merchandise from the store. The professor smiled and told the young man that he was the coveted bonus. Hong Hing told the professor that he was on his way to a doctorate. The professor said that he was well aware of the young man's situation, but at that very moment he asked the professor if he would change his mind. The professor said that he would never change it. Hong Hung was puzzled because he knew that his words had hit him very hard, and at the same moment he realized that in this laboratory he was nothing more than a simple variable. He understood that he had received the title thanks to his daughter, and wondered if he could now decide her future. It still remained a mystery to him why he was not considered a genius father, but later he received unexpected news. The professor told the young man that there was a symposium on artificial intelligence in Boston, so he should listen. He was puzzled because he had only recently started working in the lab, and he could not go to the symposium since he was a newcomer. The professor said he was too old to joke about such things. At that very moment, the young man asked the professor why he had chosen him, and wanted to know whether his report was related to the main theme of the symposium. The professor said that everything was as it should be, and noticed that the young man had a good report. At that very moment, he beamed with happiness and thanked the professor. The professor looked at his student with a smile and said that it was an interesting approach and a good report on his part. He was very happy about this, as he understood that he had finally managed to make his contribution to the work of the laboratory. But at that very moment, he thought about what to do with his daughter and wondered if she could stay with his parents for a whole week. The professor said that they were going to visit a couple of tourist places, so he should pick out some nice clothes for his daughter. Hong Hing was taken aback and looked at the professor in surprise. The professor asked the young man in bewilderment if he had really been thinking of leaving his daughter. Sharon, in turn, overheard their conversation and asked her father if he was really going to go abroad without her. The professor smiled and said that this presentation was about artificial intelligence, and he simply couldn't help but take the young lady with him. At that moment, she smiled and said that everything was poor and she was going with them. Hong Hing looked at the professor with a puzzled expression and asked if he was going, not because his article was good, but because otherwise his daughter would not go with the professor. At that very moment, the professor said with a smile that of course it was so. The young man was taken aback, as he had not expected such a thing, and at the same time, he was very much broken. At the same time, the professor, with a joyful smile, asked the girl if she wanted to go abroad. Sharon happily said that she could not wait for them to go. Hong Yun, looking at everything that was happening, realized that everything was meaningless. He studied hard to win the competition in high school and then in university. He continued his studies in the laboratory and in high school, while the professor humiliated him every day. Now he was broken because he realized that after many years of hard work, he had become just an appendage to his daughter. He did not understand why he had worked so hard all these years. At that moment, the young lady told the professor that her father was strange. The professor sighed heavily and said that her father was weaker than he thought. At that very moment, the professor told the young man with a smile that he was just joking, and at the same time, he apologized. But he also asked if he really considered himself a simple addition to her daughter.